Alone in a dim room, the main character plopped in front of his computer, staring at the screen while the weight of his lone wolf life crushed in his only escape from a bleak routine, and the one thing he cherished more than anything, his computer games. And just like that, he got yanked into a whole new world clutching the controller, staring straight ahead with zero emotion. Shouts tear through the house, someone's yelling because she thinks he misunderstood her, and she snaps back, demanding he stop lying. Meanwhile, the protagonist trudges along with a box in his hands, wondering if this is just another domestic blow-up. Right out of nowhere, someone snaps, "Stand up," and the next second a girl tumbles down the stairs straight onto our main character. This is the very last thing the main character remembers before he dies. He's sprawled on the ground, staring straight ahead, like he can't even blink fast enough. The protagonist shot awake as an old man, rubbing his aching head like it was on fire, then stares ahead at the fruit deco boon. Its skin is rock hard, but the inside bursts with soft, juicy pulp. That old man started as a full-on adventurer, but in the end he's still right back to his roots, collecting herbs like it's his final calling. He woke up inside this body and got hit with the owner's past, thrown into the street as a kid just to save the family's food. And when he finally reached the capital, he signed up as an adventurer. Right after chasing his dream, he did everything he could, then strode hand in hand with his comrades. But no matter how hard he fought, it all crumbled. His comrades belayed on him one by one until he was left in the end with absolutely no one. Even after stealing this old man's body, the main character still couldn't adjust to life there. Back in his old life, he was just some ordinary office worker, so how in the world was he supposed to flip his fate here? Still, he can't ignore it. Something in this life feels weirdly familiar. He stared at the controller in his hands and boom, discovered a one-of-a-kind skill. One that lets him play games anytime, but right here, only one single game is waiting for him. This sandbox game is all about living your everyday fantasies, one wild day after another, with endless things you can do. Farm crops, cast lines to fish, brew potions with alchemy, or craft your very own gear. Skills aren't rare in this world, but that old man didn't get a single thing about game skills, so he barely used it, like he'd been playing these games for ages and still missed the point. And yeah, that's a win for the protagonist, because once he knows how to use the skill, the royal mantle is finally his. But in the real world, he still grinds out the lowest-ranked jobs, hauls himself into rundown cheap hotels, and kills time playing the same game, because that's what his life has been for the past 10 years. One night he was slammed by a weird dream, and when he rubbed his eyes, he blurted, "Who else is seeing this?" The guy swore it was him from a past life, so why the heck was he dressed exactly like his game character? Then he jabs his finger at a specific panel and grins, like he's already seeing the exact spot and can't wait to tell you why. He jolts awake beside the controller, heart thumping, and can't shake the question. Did he really fall asleep mid-game? He rubs his eyes again and admits it was a weird dream. Yet deep down, he still remembers this exact place from the screen. This is the city administration, the trading post. It's gotta be here, no doubt, because right now a girl with ears and glasses is sitting there. The game description says that here you can trade straight with other players. So if you want to buy or sell, you slap your item up on the bulletin board, and whoever spots your ad can strike a deal, because that's how everyone walks away happy. Since he's never even crossed paths with another player in this game, the system pops up asking what item he wants to sell. And that's why the main character never makes it to that place. After months of hesitating, the main character finally takes the leap and hits that Apple selling feature. The system lets the guy set the price, so he stares at the screen like, "What's normal?" and tries to slap down the lowest offer, 3 lin, but the real world hits hard. On the game market, it can go up to 300 lin, and even 30 lin isn't the lowest. The system buzzes him, "Your apples are on sale," and he double checks. Then it hits him, his ad is now up on the board, screaming that he's selling apples for 3 li each. Then the system asks if you want to buy apples, and the guy realizes, oh wow, he posted that ad, so he's basically stuck buying them for next to nothing. So it doesn't matter. He slams the button on the controller. Then boom, he gets hit with the news. His account's got no funds to cover the purchase. He has to stuff coins in to pay, and right in the middle of the controller, a coin slot snaps open. Then the main character's mind races. What if he really drops that coin in? And before he can second guess himself, he goes for it. Then the system flashes. Deal complete, right as an apple drops into the protagonist's room, and he can barely breathe as he realizes he actually bought it. This moment lit up his whole world. He stretched out his hand for the apple as a shooting star blazed across the sky. He should have realized this way sooner, because the apple he bought in the game was hands down the tastiest thing he'd ever bitten. Once he clocked that he could buy stuff inside the game using the items he'd personally listed for sale, he finally made up his mind and headed straight for the trading guild. The bespectacled girl shoots him an apology for the wait, then admits it, she's the one who handles the buying and selling end to end. Before he commits, she tells him to try his product first, and the main character agrees. She takes one bite of an apple, and instantly her face lights up because it's so sweet. Then the guy drops the truth. Most apples out there taste sour, so he understands exactly why she couldn't believe it. She fires off the question, "What about this price?" and scribbles 3,000 on paper. Then the main character's jaw drops, sure his apples are about to get priced at 2 to 3 times that. She tells him in a rough twist of fate that they only deal in wholesale. Then adds that the moment he hauls in more apples, they'll pay a clean 500 LN per apple, and he immediately nods and agrees. Next day he shows up with a whole barrel of apples, and the girl just stares, saying, "You were here yesterday, how did you come back with an entire barrel today?" Then he blurts out, "So, were you waiting for me?" The girl shuts him down fast, shoving a scrap of paper into his hands. 25,000 lin listed on it. Then the main character's eyes blow wide. 500 lin for one apple. He swallows hard and blurts, "I'm a kin." Labelia beams and proudly declares, "I'm Labelia." Then rushes to say she can't wait to team up with a Ken. The protagonist blurts that he's happy too, then can't stop thinking about her name. Because even though he's an adventurer from the guild, nobody's ever once asked him. The guild didn't care about anything except the job, paperwork done, payment confirmed. And the moment that voice finally said his name after all these years, the guy just couldn't believe it. At last, he stopped standing on the sidelines and felt like he truly belonged to this world. Looks like the main character wrapped it up fast, and straight up hated the idea of just sitting there, so he's asking himself, "If I've got time to spare, what am I supposed to do?" He spots the girl and shrugs it off as the same sad scene he sees all over the capital. Abandoned, just like that old man back then. Except this time, he's finally out of excuses and can't help them. But today, the main character hands the girls apples and fires off the question, "Want to try them?" The main character fires off a question, "How long have you been living here, and do you have a shelter where someone can sleep right on the street?" He leans in, tells the girls, then quit hesitating, become adventurers. And right after that, they gobble up the apples. He marched everyone straight to the registration guild, then slipped out and bought the cheapest gear money could find. He watches them scavenge grass and thinks, yeah, it's backbreaking work for scraps, but at least this is how they'll earn a living and keep going. So they'll eat good and spend less, and here they'll finally get a room to rent. He tells them good luck, and the girl turns toward him. All three of them beam and thank him, and the main character freezes when it finally clicks. These aren't guys at all, they're three girls, and he somehow never even noticed. Once he finally understood what his skills were really worth, his whole life flipped for the better. And this week, he showed up with apples. The girl beams and thanks him for his help. And while he'd normally pull in 7,000 lin a week as an adventurer grinding guild orders, his new skill flips the script. Now he's raking in 25,000 lin. He could have ditched the adventurers, but that's not who he is at all. So he stays home, sinking into the couch, perfectly content to do absolutely nothing all day. And get this, he's stuck in the absolute cheapest hotel in the capital, where your room is only yours until morning. So if you want to stay through the day, they hit you with extra charges. He's dreaming about buying his own house, but right now he's forced to save, because you never know when the price of apples might suddenly drop. If this all goes down, he's getting pulled back into adventuring, so he knows exactly where he has to head. Straight into the forest. Right outside the capital sits this huge forest, and adventurers keep charging in to snatch medicinal herbs, because one single bag can fetch 1,000 lin. Sure, you can push deeper into the forest. There are rare herbs growing there that you could sell to alchemists for a fat paycheck, but the danger is huge. Monsters might leap out at any moment, and that's exactly the thrill he's chasing. If he'd mastered alchemy, he'd have made way more money. Because in this game you can't brew potions at all, since there are any herbs to use. Most times he hawks whatever the game spits out, but what if he sells something that doesn't even belong to that world? He jumps into the system and punches in exactly what it demands. The protagonist slams the button, and instantly watches his bag of herbs start vanishing. He'd found a medicinal herb, whipped up a low-level healing potion recipe, and then bam, sent the character straight to the alchemy table. The protagonist brews a low-level healing potion, and when it finally works, joy hits him like a wave. He can't believe he pulled it off. He's already plotting where to sell it. Can't go below $150 a piece. And healing potions usually get snapped up by soldiers, hospitals, and adventurers, except the first two don't even need to buy from him since they've got their own alchemists. He can't stop thinking about what it really means to step into the guild tomorrow. Then out of nowhere, a stranger's voice cuts through the air. He realizes it's the same trio of girls again, so he hands them apples, tells them he's got a few more left, and lets them go ahead and take them. The main character shows up again, and the dude waves like a show-off, while he smugly thinks he's totally not sorry at all for what he's about to share with them. The very next morning, she races in, throws out an apology, and demands to know why he's here so damn early. With an awkward grin, the protagonist blurts out that he's here to sell them weak healing potions. The girl pauses, thinks it through, and says, "We need an appraisal first before we sell," and the guy nods right away. She knows this is a measly healing potion, but she's still ready to hand over 300 lin for one bottle, or 2,700 for all 9. And when she asks if it works for him, the guy shoots back with a happy yes. So yeah, inside the game you pay 150 lin more for each bottle than you would in real life, which means all 9 bottles hit 1350 lin, and when you factor in the hours it takes to gather herbs, it's just not worth it. If only he could grow medicinal herbs in the game by himself, he'd rake in serious profit. The girl snaps back and asks Akon if he's really an alchemist. Then he shakes his head and admits he didn't learn any secret craft. He just stumbled on the recipe and managed to brew that simple potion. She gushes that it's incredible he's stuck with the guild for all these years, and that their hard work finally paid off, and he can only thank her, thinking it's awkward as hell to hear it from someone else. Honestly, it was perfect timing. They finally mastered alchemy just as the guild's longtime alchemist got transferred to the hospital, and with the dungeon going wild in the west, potion supplies promptly ran dry. So yeah, they'll gladly work with him, no questions asked. The guy nods along, and you can tell he's thrown for a loop because he never expected to hear that kind of gratitude. Now the main character has to crank out small potions by the hundreds, and the girl cheers that he's right on time, like making him happy is totally effortless. Even if he buries every bed with medicinal herbs, the seeds still refuse to sprout. He figures he should probably hire some workers, but he's got no contacts in the guild. He won't even reach out to his old comrades. And right then, small kids sprint past like the world's daring him to catch up. Poverty is everywhere, and to keep their families afloat and not lose their homes, kids are forced to work from the moment they can walk. Most of them, just like him, scrape out a living by hauling medicinal herbs for the guild. "You can always gamble on a risk," he tells the kids, then one boy snaps, "Hey, old man, what do you want?" He leans in. They're headed straight to the guild, so don't slow them down. "They're tossing those herbs at us, 1,100 for the lot." But the guild only coughs up 1,000, and the boys immediately demand, "Are you serious?" So he snatches up 5 bags for 500 lin, and they thank him like crazy, shouting with pure joy that they're lucky enough to finally get food. He spots nobody around, yanks out the controller, then starts counting. One tiny healing potion costs 300 lins, so he buys 60 bottles for a total of 18,000 lins. And after the numbers crunch down, the whole expense hits 14,500 lins. With 3,500 lin on the table, the money still isn't cutting it. But he knows apples won't save him either, because the gates to the capital slam shut every night. By the fire at night, the main character sinks into the glow, and then it hits him. He's been playing that game for so long he can't even remember what time it is anymore. He's sitting there craving food, and then the idea hits. Maybe he should whip up something in the game. In the game, you can craft food and all kinds of items, but the kicker is, you can't eat a single bite since it's purely decor. The main character gets it instantly, like that sad sample food you find in restaurants. He still has to give it a shot, so he eyes the classic Asian lunch for 300 lin, then figures 2 meat sandwiches will keep him full. The system pops up, "Buy the classic Asian lunch," and the guy instantly clicks yes. Then he jerks his head up in shock. Everything he just picked forms right in front of him, right down to the sticks beside it, and the protagonist silently goes, "Bon appetit." He digs in, and the grilled salmon hits first with that faint salty snap. Then the warm rice sweeps in with sweet comfort, while the miso soup washes everything over his tongue with rich tofu flavor. He remembers that in his past life, he ate this same kind of dinner all the time, but back then, it didn't hit nearly as hard as this. The main character lets out a breathy moan through happy tears, because every bite is unreal. So he keeps eating, finishes in a blissful rush, and even thanks himself for the masterpiece he just devoured. That overstuffed guy, feeling instantly all good for some reason, suddenly gets talked to. He's shocked by it, whips around, and his mind reels, what's a woman's voice doing in a place like this? Then he blurts out, "Who's there?" A girl twirls a fan in front of him, dressed to steal the spotlight, and with a warm smile she presses him, asking why he's so damn shocked. The girl smirks and declares, "I'm the Grand Duchess of Frommery Leva Tonstria." And the protagonist freezes in shock, blurting, "Wait, you're a noblewoman." Leva snaps, asking the guy with a sharp edge whether he's heard of her. Then he freezes, awkward to his bones, because in his entire life he's never even laid eyes on an aristocrat. The girl snaps her fan up to hide her face and blurts out, "I'm the 3rd daughter of King Ru, the one who founded Belstein, and even the people here don't recognize me." Then she lets out a heavy sigh, and the guy immediately bows, begging for forgiveness. If the nobles have turned their wrath on you, this world demands one thing: drop your head to the ground and beg for forgiveness. The girl gently tells him to lift his head, and when he thanks her, he instantly jolts. because he realizes she has no legs. Leva sizes up the protagonist and shrugs, "So you're uneducated, then so be it. I'll enlighten you." She leans in and drops the bomb. Her father founded this kingdom and he lived here 300 years ago. He blurts out how she's supposedly 300 years old too, and she smirks that she's wickedly skilled at magic. Plus she's got secret knowledge on immortality. He can't help but think she's basically a lick or a ghost wearing a smile. But you don't have to fear her, she's not worth a second of his time. His life force means nothing to him, and he's long past the age for that kind of foolish obsession. She's way more focused on the weird, curious skill he's got, and she smirks like she's teasing him. Then the protagonist realizes she really did see him. The girl asks the guy if he's the reason he managed to make pure white rice, and he nods, so she beams, says, "I knew it," then snaps her fan shut. When she saw it in his hands, she hurried over to talk to him, because her dad had always dreamed of getting a taste of this delicacy. And suddenly his silhouette flashed in her mind. She whips around to the main character and asks straight up if he can cook it for her. He freezes in shock. Then after a moment he caves in, agreeing, and tells the girl to hang tight for a little. After that, the main girl shoves food into her hands, and the kid just stares. Because this is wild. She tells him he truly has an insanely curious talent. The girl tells the guy to wait right here, then starts vanishing and he's stunned. Until she pops back with nothing to show for it, and suddenly he realizes it happened in a blink. Leva shoves 2 round things into his hands and declares it's pay for his work. Then the guy's jaw drops in pure shock. He snatches it up and demands, "What is this?" But the girl just smirks and says, "Try it first, then you'll know." Leva tells him, "It's time, I'm heading back." Then she adds, "If you don't want to get soaked, I'll find you shelter from the rain." And with a bright grin, she makes sure he knows the king founder of this land felt the joy he brought. Then they break apart and scatter, right as rain starts hammering down, while the main character sinks into a tent, staring at 3,500 lin like his potion profit has vanished into thin air. He stares at the 2 berries, torn between eating them or planting them in the game, because this isn't just any loot, it's a gift from the immortal princess. And he's so scared he can barely hold it, like even her kindness might still bite. He starts plotting what he could plant. Then the guy grabs the controller and studies what his skill can really do. Because 1 golden cherry costs just 1 lin, and he's blown away by how ridiculously cheap it is. He knows the game runs on cheap tricks and shady principles, and he nods. Yeah, he'll sell that cherry, set the max price, and pull out a mountain of cash. But something in his gut screams, "Don't do it, don't say it'll slow you down." Because honestly, he's not the serious type, he only plays on medium or easy. He feels it, something finally pushing through. Then he reads about medicinal herbs and realizes they've already started sprouting. And for the first time, hope flickers that maybe, just maybe, things aren't totally hopeless. The main character is stuck in his own head, asking what he's even supposed to do with his life. Right now, his big dream is leveling up his living conditions, and he could straight up save for a house just by selling apples once a week. Wait, so that's all he's chasing. He stalls, staring into the void, asking himself what else he wants. Then boom, the adventurer's armor is already ready and he can't hide his shock. In this world, if you don't take combat missions, they brand you as an iron-ranked adventurer, and everyone looks down on you like you're nothing, and yeah, he's one of them. But it's not like that really ruins his day. But neither he nor the old man got a shred of satisfaction from it, and his hard work clearly blew up in his face. The main character just sits there, then it hits him like a punch. They didn't even care about anything else, they only wanted recognition. He clings to the girl's words about relying on him, and now that he's cracked how the skill truly works, he's done waiting, time to snatch the recognition he's owed. Because this kind of power doesn't just change things, it drives him forward. He doesn't even have a real destination, so the second he thinks about adventuring, his mind snaps to dungeons. Rain keeps hammering down all night, and while it won't let up, the boy falls asleep and dreams about the old man's first terrifying run-in with goblins. They got one job: escort that caravan through danger, and the crew was stacked with 2 battle-tested adventurers plus 3 wide-eyed rookies desperate to learn. They all locked in, finished the task, then pushed straight for the dungeon. Every single one of them agreed. On this one mission, he was like dead weight. While the others charged in, goblins closed in around him, and he couldn't even take a single step. The boy checks on them, asking if they're safe and if they can walk, and the 2 nod right along with him. Then he thrusts out his hand and orders them to stand. After that, they never say a word again. I've spotted them a few times in the guild too, always in fancy armor, like that's the line that splits the ones who charge ahead from the ones who stay behind. Watching his loved ones vanish, the old man broke all the way through. Now a crushing weight sinks into his chest, and his tears finally spill out. Then just like that, he wipes away his tears, locks eyes with them, and serious as stone, promises what he's about to show next. We're stuck in a training room, and the protagonist is panting hard with a weapon clutched tight. Then he finally reaches the Adventurers Guild training grounds. He wipes his face, thinking he desperately needs a break. Then an eye-patched stranger slides up and greets him with a grin. Turns out he used to be a full-on adventurer, but that eye injury shut it all down. So now he runs a combat training dojo, and when he casually asks the guy how he's doing, the poor guy just freezes in shock. The guy hears the main character is knee-deep in alchemy, so he snags herbs from shady local punks to brew potions. While the main character realizes he's been exposed, yet he never bothers to watch his back, and those punks are tracking him with terrifying precision. Since he's an alchemist, why in the world does he need combat training? Can't he just skip it? The main character awkwardly blurts that he chose to remember his youth. Out of nowhere, the guy bursts into laughter, and the main character snaps in rage, demanding he stop laughing at him. Then he blurts out an apology, saying it's just too funny, right as the door suddenly creaks open. The protagonist whips around in total shock, and there, standing there in gleaming armor, is a blonde girl staring back. The protagonist points at the mystery person and asks the one-eyed guy who they are. He just shrugs and says he has no clue. But from the way they look, they sure don't scream newbie. He can't stop thinking, she must be from some noble bloodline because that sword looks insanely expensive for its quality. He throws in the towel, like it's none of his business anyway. After pounding through training at the training ground, he heads straight to a public bathhouse to scrub the sweat and exhaustion off his body, then makes his way back to the hotel. He trudges home deep in thought about what he's gonna eat for dinner, until someone suddenly closes in on him. The kids beam and tell him they picked herbs today, and he lights up, asking if every bag is up for sale, while they happily nod, confirming it all. He finally gets it, he can't haul everything on his own, so they ask, can we take it to the hotel, and they all agree. He stared at the kids and realized they were dreaming of life as adventurers, and he secretly hoped they'd earn their way through it, while knowing he had no right to say it out loud. He's holed up in the cheapest hotel himself, sprawled on the bed, lost in his own thoughts. Even with that wild, youthful drive to live big, he refuses to let emotion take the wheel, because he still remembers the happy boy telling him, thanks to you, we finally saved up for a gun. In his hands, the controller feels real, and he realizes he's not done yet. He still wants to push forward. He's up to his elbows all day, brewing potions, harvesting crops, tending fields, and fishing nonstop. The night finally crashes in. He glances out the window and realizes, again, he's totally lost track of time while he's been gaming, and sure, he could drag himself into the city to eat, but he can't even get up. Maybe he should just order something in the game, because the other day he grabbed a classic Japanese lunch, and now all he can think about is tonkatsu. That's right, Mrs. Frommery thrust a golden cherry into his hands, and it had already somehow grown. The protagonist spots a glowing golden cherry tree and realizes it actually sprouted for real. Only a week passed, but it grew way faster than the apple tree ever did. He cradles a cherry in his hands, squinting at it like, this is it, just a cherry. Yet those golden bunches somehow don't look ordinary at all. He decides to go for it anyway, and a balanced sweetness hits first. Then a faint sour sting spreads across his tongue. He declares it delicious, swears that in a past life he had top-tier cherries, and insists the flavor tastes almost exactly like them. He grabs the second bite, instantly realizing his fear was pointless. Then bam, some strange sound hits and he drops into a dazed stupor. He can't stop fixating on that brutal ringing inside his head. Then the system swoops in, and suddenly it congratulates him. The guy just earned a single strength point and unlocked the skilled Daytime Wanderer, and the main character can't believe what he's seeing. He blurts out, wait, are you serious? Daywalkers are what vampires get called. And then his face tightens like he can't possibly believe this, like something about it just doesn't add up. The very next day, sunshine blasts the world, and the main character slips out of the house, holds his palm up to the light, and exhales in pure relief. Like the sun didn't turn into his enemy after all. He's convinced daytime wanderers are basically vampires who aren't scared of the sun, so it proves nothing, until those fangs pop out of nowhere, then vanish just as fast. He knows he has to push into the forest no matter what and track down Mrs. Frommery, so he peers across the field and freezes. Too many people are crowded there, but the pouring rain is also making medicinal herbs sprout like they're multiplying overnight. Maybe that's the clue. The protagonist races through the forest and finally spots the spot where they met Frommery. Then he blurts her name at the top of his lungs, frantically asking if she's here, and right then, something erupts. He gets it, last time she slipped in after dark, so he thinks she might as well roll the dice again once the sun goes down. He chokes out an apology and can't stop wondering if she's truly gone for good. Suddenly, the fan-wielding girl pops back up behind the main character and demands to know what just happened. Then the main character erupts into a terrified scream. The girl snaps that he called her himself, and next second she squeals like a pig. What is that attitude? The main character blurts an apology, then realizes she popped up behind him out of nowhere, which is why he freaked out. The girl wipes the whole mess from her mind and presses, "Why did you call me?" while the guy finally decides, "All right, I'm telling you everything." She's laughing her head off and the main character snaps back that it isn't funny, because her gift is what flipped him into a vampire. The girl tells him this is called God's boundless love, and if he eats it, he'll unlock all kinds of gifts for the people. The gift can either nudge him a little stronger or unlock some rare skill, so the guy snaps, "How is that even possible?" The girl answers, "A vampire isn't a skill, it's a whole race, and yeah, explaining that to you is going to be a real challenge." A weird magic circle blooms right in front of the girl's fingers, and the main character gapes at it in pure shock, while she leans in and tells him to just accept it. Some wild sparks crackle around his hands and the main character snaps, "What did you just do?" The girl blurts that she fed him magic and the shock hits him like lightning. The girl calmly tells him, "Say assessment out loud, and then you'll see it with your own eyes," so he nods, thrusts his hands forward and blurts out the right word. He spots a table packed with details about him. His name, race, stats, a whole list of skills, and even a spell. The guy's stunned, then it vanishes out of nowhere, and the girl wastes no time, deciding she's going to tell him the truth about his stats. The girl erupts into laughter and slams Akon with the truth, he's completely worthless. And the mana, it barely lasted a full minute of the assessment. She keeps laughing and it grates on the protagonist's nerves, so she snaps, "Do you see it?" While he still treats people with those vampire powers, and now she finally studies his skill with real interest. The girl leans in and tells the guy there's nothing to worry about at all. Then he stares at her, totally stunned. After years of being stuck at night, craving blood like a prison meal, the main character finally loosened. His shoulders dropped, the all-day tension snapped away, and for once he could eat like a normal person. The girl blurts that right as he's about to start eating, could he please do her father a favor? Then the main character nods and agrees. Akian throws together lunch with Tonkatsu, and then the girl drops a crazy request. She's basically asking him to count her consultation and kindness as payment for half the meal, and the protagonist is completely stunned. She tells him to train like his life depends on it, forge his body, sharpen his spirit, and one day he'll earn a spot in her entourage. Then she vanishes and the main character suddenly feels it. He's dug a hole for himself and it's going to get deep. After Mrs. Frommery stormed out, the main character caught it all over again. The main character dug in, then basically raved about how insanely tasty it was. He savored that juicy pork, enjoying the peace of being alone while the rain drummed softly outside. And just like that, his life slid back into routine after devouring the golden cherry. His numbers climbed day by day. But no matter how high they soared, he still couldn't match his instructor. The instructor glances at Kosser's stats and can't help but think, this kid is insanely strong. He never saw it coming. He thought he'd just be selling and munching cherries, then someone suddenly apologizes and snaps, "Can you spare me a minute?" The armored girl slaps down a wanted poster, asks if he's seen the guy, and he immediately realizes she's the same woman who showed up at their place the other day. Then his jaw drops at the reward for the head, because the amount is stacked with so many zeros it's unreal. He can't believe it, 5 million. The girl snaps, asking the guy if he saw him, and the main character immediately shuts him down, admitting he only got rattled by how massive the reward was. She gets it instantly and she snaps, "I'll pay anything at all just to find him." Then she leans in and dares, "So remember my face clearly." He swore he'd seen that guy before, or maybe his mind was playing tricks. So he dragged him into her hands alive or dead, because she'd pay a solid price for any clue, and then he demanded to know what he'd done that had her hunting him. Anger sparks in her chest as she snaps, and she finally confesses that this man murdered her older brother. The main character lights up, finally gets her and blurts, "That's it." Then their conversation cuts off for good. The main character tells everyone straight up he's terrified. Then his mind spirals into revenge for his brother like he's staring at a scene ripped from a historical novel. In his past life, he had zero ties to anyone. In this new one, he's got no family and no friends either, so affection feels completely out of reach. Maybe he should try to bond with someone too, but when he sees the sadness in her eyes, it feels like that road isn't worth the pain. Who in their right mind would want to get tangled up with some old man like him? Chasing those thoughts away, he marched over to the bulletin board to study the orders. Sure, the tasks never end, but at heart he's doing one thing, grabbing stuff or pitching into clean. He's itching to start taking jobs as an escort, or even to go slaughter monsters in that dungeon. But right now he just isn't strong enough yet. A stranger rolls up and asks the thoughtful protagonist if he's hunting for work, and he replies that it's been ages since they've seen each other, leaving the guy totally baffled until he leans in and demands, "Wait, do you even remember me?" Suddenly the protagonist blurts out, "The Wind Blade," because ages ago he'd worked part-time with this same crew, hauling their gear and trophies like a loyal runner. He fires the question, "Did you make it back from the dungeon?" And the fair-haired guy answers with total confidence, They basically decide to grab an easier job even if the pay's trash because the real win is getting to rest. He's thinking if I split this between 5, everyone gets 9,000. Then he hears he has to escort the caravan, so they tell him, "You're being too cautious, why not come with us?" Because there's a surcharge when the conditions turn dangerous. The protagonist finally gets it. He was never the target, it was his usefulness. They don't have enough hands and now they're coming to take him. He can't shake the feeling that they only came to him because he's already been part of their crew, otherwise they would have grabbed a stronger adventurer. And that realization leaves him with a messy swirl of emotions. Sure, he could sit back and rake in cash from selling, but that's not why he's here. He craves the rush of real action, and since he's not headed into the mission alone, he agrees to team up with them. The guy promises he'll tell the administrator they're taking the order, and the main character can't help but grin, because charging 9,000 for an escort with strong fighters, that feels like easy money. They agree to meet tomorrow morning at the gate, and then they tear into a goodbye, waving like they're trying to hold on to each other a little longer. Right before he heads out of the city, he swings by the trade guild and pitches the new stuff. Then he holds up a cherry, leans in, and asks, "So, what do you think?" The bespectacled girl declares she's ready to grab a bunch for $2,000, and the main character's jaw drops, because that price is a whopping 4 times what apples cost. The girl leans in and whispers that she's the one who shared the secret. Turns out his apples are the talk of the nobility and merchants alike. She tells him the grapes will flip the entire market on its head, and the main character finally gets it. The girl bids him farewell and he finally gets it. His apples are being bought through the upper class's reps. And just like that, he dashed out to grab supplies, filled his bags with medicinal herbs, and made it crystal clear he wouldn't be back in town for a while. He puts together a combo, hamburger, fries, and a cola, and the moment it's done, he finally lets his guard down and relaxes. He downs cola and daydreams about how insanely good that bad-for-you flavor feels, especially after 10 years of staying clean. Just don't let anyone else see you need it. He slams his drink down, pricks up his ears at the noise, and thinks the girls are back, already acting like they've ordered to copy books. In this world, book printing is basically crippled, so every book costs a fortune, so the census job pays pretty well. He tried to at least claw back a few words from the local language, but the old man was never really taught how to read. The main crew pushed the girls to take on new assignments, put their own skills to the test, and then bam, they handed them an order. Copy the book, and he was so proud you could practically feel it. He's convinced that no matter what happens, he's fully ready for tomorrow. In the game, he forges weapons and gear for NPC adventurers. Then they storm out, slaughter monsters, and haul back the materials he needs to keep crafting even more. He's been grinding this game for years, stacking up a mountain of amazing gear, but he has no clue what's waiting for him on this trip. And still, he won't overpack with 2 rare items. He'll stick to solid gear that keeps him alive. He swears everything's ready, then heads to bed like always, snatching the golden vision to eat one more time. But the moment he takes a bite, that awful voice in his head starts screaming. After he chows down, he figures it's bedtime. And as soon as morning hits, he shows up to the meeting and talks straight to him. They tell him his armor's legit, and the main character gives this awkward, stumbling thank you. Then the guy invites him to head to the caravan, and the main character nods right along. He blurts out, "Yep, I'm here," and the caravan rolls with 2 carts. Meanwhile, the protagonist squints at the emblem and swears it looks like a famous store everyone talks about. Usually a caravan hauls a whole pile of goods to another city, but this time they've only got 1 single barrel. The blonde boy informs the coachman that the Windblad crew is riding with them today, and the coachman shoots back that they've been waiting for them. He tells himself, since they're here they can leave, hell, they can climb right in. And the guy muses about the coachman while the main character keeps chewing on the same question. Why hire a whole squad of adventurers just to transport 1 lone barrel with whatever's inside? Suddenly the coachman spots him, freezes, and demands to know if Akon is truly him, then presses, "Do you remember me?" with the strangest vibe, like something's seriously off. He's shocked when it clicks. Vizar isn't just any guy, he's his comrade, or even worse, his past comrade. After that caravan escort mission, Vizar's name finally started to shine, and now he's out here as a young adventurer, so the boy grabs him and asks, "Then why are you really here?" He bursts in and says everything's changed, then slaps his prosthetic leg into view and declares he won't be chasing adventure anymore. At least not with someone like you. An enraged man snaps at them to shut up, time is money, and Vizar shoots back an apologetic smile. He barks an order at the protagonist, head for the carriage, so the protagonist obeys without hesitation twice. And in his mind, he's convinced Vizar ditched the adventurers because he lost his leg. They launch into motion, and the protagonist stays glued in the carriage, staring it all in. while someone leans in and snaps that he needs to stop overthinking what's happening. They tell him they've seen this one-legged cab driver before, and the protagonist clocks him as an archer from the blade of the wind, then nods and gives a confident yes. The archer shoves his hand out and demands the main character look. Then, in a dungeon fight, he got his fingers completely ripped away. For an archer, those fingers are everything, so he burned every last savings just to weld them back in the right place, and honestly, not every adventurer gets that kind of luck. He was barely able to find work at all. The archer warns that once adventurers go underground, disaster hits hard, so many end up disabled, and it's the classic fate every brave soul expects. He finally gets it. This is him trying to console the protagonist, and then the truth spills out. He's still jealous that they get to dive into the dungeons. And yeah, it's an experience you can't even describe. The archer grins and tells him he talks just like some little kid, and the main character bursts into laughter. Seeing Vizar like that hit him like a punch, he froze in shock, felt the full weight of his own potential, and realized he wasn't about to quit, even if it was naive in the dumbest, childlike way. He's determined to see this world with his own eyes, so today they stop right here and make the arrest. After they shoved up the tent and crunched through those dry rations, they started handing out shifts, until the fair-haired guy leaned in and asked if they'd watch from night to morning, and everyone nodded and agreed. Even if goblins are crawling down from the mountains, the protagonist realizes monsters aren't the only threat, and he's got to watch more than just one direction. That mission's senior adventurer drilled this wisdom into him: listen up. When you step outside the city gates, don't just look, use everything: sight, hearing, smell. The main character gets told to raise his head up and stare at where he is. Then the guy nods and agrees. The main character does it. He snaps his eyes away, freezes at the noise, and immediately wonders what kind of weird sound that was. He realizes he's been shipped in that direction, and the moment he spots the bushes, a clawed paw shoots out of the shadows. And just like that, there are tons of creepy creatures with pointy ears and stretched out snouts, so the main character instantly realizes, oh, they're goblins. He screams that the alarm is ringing. Goblins are swarming the camp, and the commander barks for the adventurers to grab their weapons. He stares at the truth. He's never once killed a monster before, and that thought hits him hard as he sinks deeper into it. Now there's no escape. He tightens his grip on the weapon, and one goblin charges at him, screaming his way. Then he drives the blade through the goblin, and it hits him hard that he actually did it. Right after that, more goblins swarm in toward him, and when the protagonist finally realizes he's totally boxed in, curses burst out of him. Then an arrow rockets into the goblin's head, and the protagonist gasps in shock, while the archer grins at him and says he's doing great. Right after that, the archer grins at the main character and promises, I'm backing you, count on me. The main character's eyes widen in shock. He demands where everyone else went. Because goblins swarm this place and there's no one to back him up, so how is he supposed to survive alone? The archer knows this isn't some simple situation. He fights the urge to get distracted. Then more goblins spill out and the guy curses again. They wiped out every last goblin and the main character finally slumped from exhaustion. Then the archer leaned in and told him, you did an amazing job. The guy grins and says, good, it's finally over. But the archer snaps back, nope, this is only the start, and points straight at the goblin crowd. The blonde boy stands there with a sword gripped tight, staring ahead and demands, tell me, did you kill everyone? But somehow it looks like a bunch of goblins bolted in that direction. So the guy insists they have to chase them, even though that whole thing feels way too weird. The protagonist's gut churns. This is way too weird because goblin raids are usually 10 at a time, yet they're being hit by way more and someone snaps their attention to him. They tell him straight up that the extra danger pay isn't a gift, it's because something worse is coming, so he can't just fear goblins, and that's when the protagonist starts to worry. Someone might have staged a monster attack on their camp. He tries to figure out who's behind the sound, but when he finally hears it clearly, it's just Vizar's voice. Though that cough still throws him off, and he instantly assumes someone attacked him. The protagonist strides up to the cart and calls out to Vizar, only to spot a man beside him wearing a face that's been hidden. The protagonist snaps an order, get away from Vizar now, and the guy instantly gets it. Someone planned this attack with cold precision. Somebody outside already knows that scream is coming from the wagon. They have to rush there fast, because that stranger is furious. Then this guy bolts straight into the forest, and the blonde one barks at him to stop. An archer fires off, are you alive? But the protagonist snaps back that the only thing that matters is whether Vizar is still breathing. He raises his hand and insists, I'm fine. Then drops after a punch straight to the chest, sure he'll survive, while the monster assault turns out to be masterminded by a weird stranger, all for the sake of one barrel sitting right there. What's inside it anyway? The protagonist decides it's safer not to find out, because once he knows, problems will come crashing in. Yet that simple escort mission turned out to be way more brutal than he ever expected. That goblin attack had them on edge. But after that night they pushed through, hit their destination without a single scare, and learned that he'd been a huge help. They tell him, if we land any work, we'll call you. The main character grins and waves them off like it's already his win. Then he snatches a look at the paper and grins. He thinks he can cash that check at the guild. But he has no clue the hazard pay is about to be insane, and right then, someone steps up to him. Vazir steps up in front of him and invites him to share a glass. And the main character can't help but stare in shock at his sudden arrival. He blurts, "No, I'm out," then tears into a goodbye to Vizar, but right before he leaves, he insists he's got one last thing to tell him. Vizar slams a hand to his chest and asks Acheon straight up if he's still nursing a grudge against them. The main character seethes over that insult, plans a reply that says it's all in the past, then stops short, because he decides to hit him back in a totally different way. The guy blurts out to Vissar that he's actually relieved they broke up. Then Acheon storms off, and Vissar just stands there stunned. Vissar stands there frozen, realizing they walked away from him on purpose. So yeah, it's all right. Then someone steps up and asks, "Are you Vissar? If you are, answer a few questions." Vizar finally realizes this whole mess is his own fault. He chased that lead like a fool. Yeah, maybe it's for the best they split when they did, because if they hadn't, he'd be stuck reliving the exact same heartbreak as them. The protagonist gets hit with the bombshell. His total reward is 14,000 lin, and he stares stunned as he snatches the bag of money in shock. After crunching the whole 9,000 lin reward plus a 5,000 hazardous condition surcharge, and counting the trip back, he banked 2,300 lin every single day. Sure, these orders paid better than hawking potions and food, but with death on the table, the money didn't feel worth it. If he wants real money, he's gotta either chase monster orders or dive straight into the dungeon. So tell me, is he actually ready to gamble everything for cash? He grips the coin and realizes, nah, adventurers don't throw themselves into danger just for cash. It's the thrill of chasing the impossible. Right here, the main character can't stop thinking about what's really driving him to become an adventurer. He stares at the truth that money buys comfort, but he grabs his own fist and snaps. If he hunts only one prize, he'll choke out the joy of living itself, because this guy doesn't want a single benefit. He wants the wild pleasure of being an adventurer. So his first mission is to hurl him into a safe, smooth adventure, if that miracle can even happen. First, he has to track down a carriage headed for the capital. And right behind him, a girl calls out to him. She blurts out that someone unbelievably important is demanding an audience with him, leaving the guy stunned speechless. After a while, he finds himself standing right in front of the girl who handed him the golden cherry, then glances down with a shaky, awkward kind of embarrassment. The protagonist fumbles around and awkwardly turns to Farmer Mari, asking what she's doing here, because she's got a request for him. The girl tells him to carry something to a place she'll name later, and that wording hits him wrong. He hates it. And no matter how she asks, he doesn't think he can. Frommery jabs a finger at him and demands he doesn't forget. He owes her big time, because it looks like she just handed him a spell that actually works. She goes on about delivering something priceless, something she alone can trust, then insists he's got the status to pull it off, or he'll make her check firsthand just how strong he's become. He gets that she knows he's starting to grow golden cherries, and he snaps that he can't handle a job that responsible. She calls him stubborn. But just then someone turns to her and tells her something, and he just sits there in front of them all. Omari then shoots up, raises his fan, and commits. If he nails her task, he rockets his rank from iron straight up to bronze. Adventurers get sorted into 4 ranks: gold, silver, bronze, and iron, but with how weak he feels, he never even dares to chase a promotion. He says it's a huge honor, yet deep down he knows his power isn't even close to strong enough to jump up a whole rank. The guildmaster tells him, "No sweat, finish the job and we'll bump your rank," and he finally gets it. He'll be there with him. The girl whips around to Akon and with a terrifying glare tells him that if he backs out now, she won't give him another chance. So the main character swallows his fear and agrees to follow her command. He trudges off, clearly fed up, and mutters that Frommery demanded he make it there on foot, because apparently old bones just aren't meant to survive the walk. Turns out the mission is dead simple: deliver an egg to a specific mountain. He was told it belonged to the Dragon Lord from the old tales, and that someone had already stolen it right out of the nest. After a brutal non-stop search, they finally dragged the egg back. Now it has to go home. But that's easier said than done, because a shadowy crew of killers is already hunting it. So they grabbed a bunch of fake couriers, and he did it on purpose, to throw the hunters off their trail. So tell me, why would a whole country go to these wild lengths just to snatch back one egg? He demanded. And Ari answered with a story that shut him up. Long ago, when Belstein was still just a tiny kingdom, the Dragon Lord crashed in out of nowhere, eyes blazing with pure fury. Ru, the kingdom's founder, threw down with him for 3 brutal days, and when the dust finally settled, Ru stood victorious. King Ru then made a brutal choice. He spared the Dragon Lord and let him live. Later, it came out that the Dragon Lord had stormed in for revenge, because someone in Belstein had desecrated the bones of his kinsmen. When Ru heard why he was furious, she urged him to track down the culprit and hand him over to justice. But if anyone dared lay a hand on his family, he'd settle it himself. But if his kin struck first, they'd deal with the fallout. That's when King Ru and the Dragon Lord locked eyes and made their pact. After that, the dragons stopped roaming these lands. No raids, no panic. Sure, both sides paid a brutal price, but the pain forged them tighter, just like her father always said. After the rain, the earth hardens. The main character just got hit with this revelation. The very forefather of the whole kingdom was Japanese. And no matter what brutal hardships they crash into on the road, they turn it into strength, like that famous Japanese proverb says. That's exactly why the king had rice on his mind. A king ruled a whole country, an immortal beauty owned a breathtaking destiny, and an epic hero's tale unfolded, same world, different roads. So with envy burning in his chest, the guy kept sprinting up the mountain. Our main hero pushes on 2 whole days on the road, and the whole time that same chilling feeling gnaws at him. Someone's watching his every move. The main character suddenly feels his energy drain to nothing, so he plops down to rest, no matter what anyone said. He wasn't even tired. Daytime wanderer turned sleep into something he didn't need. Plus, he could feel someone else lurking nearby from a short distance. He wanted to wrap this up fast, deliver the egg, then move on because they just handed him another task. Akian got set up as bait by a criminal crew desperate to steal the egg for themselves. And right after that, the knights stormed in to catch the assassins and tear answers out of them. Still, anxiety gnaws at him. He can't sense a single knight nearby. The killers can't shake them off, and he keeps spiraling, locked in that dread that refuses to fade even when he reaches the mountain's foot. He snaps his gaze upward and realizes that back then, he'd have burned way more time just getting by on the road. But now, eating golden cherries every day pays off in real results. He clings to what he's got right now, knowing his traits may be a little higher. But his luck is still scraping the very bottom. Out of nowhere, 2 armed goons step in, one brandishes a sword and snarls at Akian. Hand over what's in that bag or you're dead. It hits him like a hammer. He's the one with the bounty on his head, and he even saw himself in that carriage last night. His partner calls him the famous Bloody Blade, and he snaps, "Shut up." He gasps when the truth hits. Ban is his past comrade's name, the one who used to be the strongest of them all, so what if it's actually him? He thought he'd become the strongest adventurer, but now it's crystal clear, he's become something else entirely. Suddenly, Akon jerks in shock. Then it soared out a hard band stab and a furious "shut up." The guy snarls at the main character, raging that he knows nothing about him. Then, out of nowhere, something unbelievable happens. The main character crumples to the ground and Ban's partner snaps, asking if he just killed him. He nods, then offers to grab the egg and disappear. They wiped out the armored guards, but it's still not certain that nobody else tracked their move. They yank the bag open and find only grass inside. Boom, the trick hits them, and they realize he played them, yet somehow he still made it to the mountain faster than everyone else. Ban shrugs off the claim that he's useless and proves it. Because yeah, it was a joke to ever think they'd trust him with something that valuable. And then, on top of that, they even say he started hawking healing potions. Ban clocks it instantly and blurts, "Wait, why did I end up with armor this good?" But he could have just sat there grinding his herbs. Nope, he snapped on the hero, and that choice is what ended him. The boy blinks and begs to run, but they still have to hunt for the egg. An emergency alarm blares. The system forces the daytime wanderer skill to snap into action. Suddenly, the protagonist's hand snaps to motion. His fang flashes out as he growls, declaring he wants blood. The killer snapped out the truth with pure irritation. This chase was pointless, because the person he was hunting had 0 chance against him. One of the murderers in their crew snapped in fury, stunned that their plan totally collapsed. He cursed that they'd poured in so much work, only to get from this man nothing but salt and a single key. A furious man snapped at the other, yelling that stealing the egg would have stopped every single problem, and he shoved the entire blame onto Visar, claiming Visar spilled the info, chickened out at the last second, and even tried to stop him. His opponent shot back with razor-cold sarcasm, making it sound like Bloody Blade Ban's been getting crushed lately. Before he could even wrap up his final sentence, his head vanished clean off his shoulders like the world blinked. Bloody Blade Ban stared at what remained of his opponent, eyes going glassy, pupils shrinking fast, until the only thing he could force out was one final question. Akian's reply erupted into full-on mockery. He burst out laughing, sneered at what happened to the young man's face, and spat that he was a downright bad man. The protagonist kept it up, acting shocked and pressing his opponent with, "Do you even know what bad man means?" Rage choked the former comrade so hard he could barely spit out a threat. Akiyan finally tossed the mask of politeness aside and snapped straight to the truth. He saw a guy who blamed everyone else for his failures, while that same guy was buried in his own mess up to his ears. Hearing that final insult, the young man snapped. He roared in fury that he'd cut off his head on the spot, and he hammered home the fact that a monster like him had no right to teach him. When the threat hit, the mocker just sneered and fired back, demanding to know what his opponent was really going to do, then pushing him to repeat himself over and over. Rage finally snapped in him. He blurted a shout and barreled toward the fight, triggering his combat skill Instant Step. The warrior snapped into action with a sharp, mocking grin, like the enemy's confusion was the punchline, taunting him, dead serious, and asking if he was really thinking of bolting at the worst possible moment. Rage surged in the warrior as he roared at the mocker to shut his mouth. Did that bloody blade, of all things, really have to fear some pathetic nobody? The scoffer snapped back that the real villain was the young man himself, right after he quit again and again, then mocked him, saying he couldn't even fathom how brutally hard the climb to the top, to power or success really is. The former comrade kept talking, insisting that survival means swallowing your pride and doing the dirtiest jobs just to keep food on the table. He warned that one wrong move at any point can turn your whole life, your whole career, into a brutal dead end. Just as he was about to speak, the protagonist cut in and pushed through that messy, emotional long story he'd been holding back. Akiyan spoke with chilling calm, completely unbothered, and flat out said he wanted nothing to do with all that man drama. He tried to blurt out something else, but before the thought could even form, the main character cut him off. So Akon snapped back, bitter as poison, saying they're the ones who left him behind and they're the ones who picked their fate. The seasoned adventurer cut his own words short with a bitter line, quoting a famous proverb to hammer the point home. What's already happened between them, or the choice they made, can't ever be undone. After those words hit him, the former comrade's confidence shattered completely, and it felt like he had absolutely nothing left to cling to. The defeated man shook with terror and begged for mercy, blurting out that he had a daughter. Gasping for breath and admitting he was guilty, he kept firing back excuses, saying his daughter landed in the shelter because of his way of living, and that it was his fault alone for taking the wrong path. The man, shaking as he reached for the winner's conscience, begged through trembling words, would he really let a little girl suffer like this? Because taking her father away would doom her to the same cruel fate that already swallowed both of them. The victor stared at that pathetic wreck and sneered, spitting cold words about how Bloodblade Band had sunk so low, then laughed at their desperate plea for his mercy. With a cold, accusing bite, the winner snapped back, demanding whether he'd ever once thought about the girl he'd stolen from his older brother, basically calling out his own hypocrisy. With every plan collapsing and any hope of peace gone, the former comrade snaps and lunges to strike. Then thud, the whole argument collapsed in one loud, heavy hit, and somehow that single sound said everything. The winner towered over the body, and in that choking silence, his calm, crushing thoughts hit him like a shock. He'd just killed a man for the first time in his life. He told himself this wasn't just some stranger. It was a former comrade who once slipped onto a dark path and went way too far, and the bitterness of what they'd done still hung heavy in the air. When the young man jolted awake, he couldn't believe it, no emotions at all, not a flicker. He started wondering if this was some twisted self-defense or the kind of coldness that comes with killing a criminal. What really gnawed at him was the absence of guilt, like some weird effect had shut that part of him off. With a bitter laugh and self-mockery, he realized his moves in that fight felt way too much like an anime villain. His mind snapped to Ban's fate and the horrifying truth hit him. All that remained of Ban was nothing but dust and something worse. It was Ban's grim, severed head, and now he stared at it like it was the biggest problem in the world. He figured you can't just shove a head in a bag, it'll rot fast, no matter what, so his answer was simple. Pickle it to stop decomposition. Then a wild idea hit him, vampires. Could they twist humans into monsters like them and maybe view it as a perfect escape plan? Just like that, he tossed his old ideas aside, and a solution snapped into place in his mind. With shaky confidence, he finally blurted out that there had to be a better way. With a sly grin, he chose to throw Ban's head, dead or not, right into the game, and the shock hit him. His own guests actually showed up just like that, and he nearly cheered when the method finally worked. He put his plan to the test. Every single object in the game stayed locked in place, fresh and spotless, no matter what. Sure, the danger was gone. He decided the time was right to grab that egg back out of the game for himself. A system window suddenly popped up, begging the other guy to buy the Dragon Lord's egg, and he nearly freaked out. Because he'd stashed that egg in his game from day one, keeping it locked up tight to guarantee it stayed totally safe and spotless. He couldn't help but grin at how handy his skill was. Then he snapped back to the warning the woman gave. If anything happened to that egg, he'd pay for it with his own head. Akian sized up everything, scanned the area, and quietly confirmed there weren't any enemies lurking nearby. Just like that, a massive shadow crashes over him, and the protagonist, caught off guard, snaps his gaze up. A thunderous voice, like someone yelling through the sky, hits him, and when he catches the word human, he snaps his eyes to a colossal tail stretching out impossibly far. Behind that voice loomed a huge dragon, growling at the hero, demanding to know if he was a messenger from the king's daughter, and pressing for the truth behind his identity and motives. The dragon demanded to know if Akon had come to reclaim the egg. Then, when Akon saw the dragon lord standing there, he burst into horror, snatched the truth out of his own voice, and admitted the egg was his property while renouncing every claim he'd made. The dragon lord flexed his power with psychokinesis, yanking the egg straight into his hands, until the man's jaw dropped, realizing the egg didn't just matter. It actually belonged to something terrifyingly powerful. The massive beast snapped around to face the hero, and after he got his cub back and the filthy thieves got wiped out, the creature pledged him one single answer. Then the dragon started talking, and it pointed right at the hero. Then he tore into the truth, why the guy he'd bitten fell apart. Because that man wasn't worthy to ever mix blood with the king's, and the dragon snapped that the hero's bite could spawn ugly offspring in the unworthy, so he'd better be careful. At last, the dragon lord delivered his final words, calling the man the bizarre Night King as he sent him off. All alone, the hero froze in pure shock, staring in horror as the creature seemed to know everything about him. Fear clamped down on his chest like a vice. He let out a shaky breath of relief, then the truth hit him. He was completely wrecked after everything that had gone down. After one brutal, non-stop journey, he finally barrels back into the capital. In a place that felt like home, a young girl burst into joy and called his name like it was the happiest sound in the world. Akian lit up with a warm welcome, and the girl smiled too, praising the way his trip had been packed with adventures, then breathing a sigh of relief that he came back safe and sound. She beamed and demanded, "Tell me, did you really bring grapes?" Then promised they'd sell out in a snap, because customers were already lining up with shaking hands, and Libelia was waiting for them just as eagerly. Akihan muttered to himself, saying if he sold just a couple more boxes of grapes, he'd finally stack enough for a house. But right as he started laying out the rest, his thoughts just cut off like he clammed up mid-plan. She asked if he'd come to sell healing potions today, and he shook his head, because he wasn't here for that at all. With ice-cold resolve blazing in his eyes, the hero straight up revealed his real goal. He wanted to find the man who put a bounty on Ban's head. Akian pushed for a face-to-face with the customer who'd posted a bounty on the criminal's head. Then she fired the same question again, and right as the protagonist didn't get it, her puzzlement finally made sense. She kept pressing, worried to the bone, and asked if he was scared to meet the noblewoman face-to-face, the client. As she spoke, she covered her mouth with her hand, cutting off their words from the random onlookers, and the adventurer instantly knew exactly where this was heading. He refused to gamble, then shot back with a question of his own: could he actually pull off the reward? To his shock, it worked. The girl lined up a meeting with the customer, and the hero, smirking with just a hint of irony, asked, "So, is this woman really terrifying everyone here?" The scene shifted to the guild's reception room, where a noblewoman turned to the hero who just arrived and struck up a conversation, because the word was clear. He was there to talk about her order. Akian doubled down on her words and clocked the woman's icy, no-nonsense stare. So the rumors were real after all, and an awkward tension hung in the air. Realizing time was running out and he couldn't afford small talk, he pushed the conversation back into his control and told her to get straight to the point. He tore open the box and reminded her in plain terms that her order demanded one thing: bring the criminal alive or dead, like he was daring her to meet the terms, and sure enough, the noblewoman's reaction hit fast. She never thought she'd lay eyes on the head of the Bloody Blade Ban. The adventurer beside them snapped with rage, firing off sarcastic accusations that Akian was trying to swindle him, chasing an easy 5 million. Then he even slipped the head of a dead man wrapped in rags and tried to sell it as Ban's. Akian stayed stone-cold calm, like there was no way anyone could shake his belief, then snapped back that he wasn't enjoying being accused of lying. Even after admitting he was only low-ranked as an adventurer, he threw down the challenge. Did they really think he'd make it up, or was their certainty about to crack? When he clocked their hesitation, he spun around and declared he was done. No more fighting, no explanations. He straightened himself, shoved his head back into the box, and just like that, he got cut off mid-move. The noble woman mumbled, shaky and unsure, insisting she had no doubts. Then she raised her hands to her head, trembling as the words caught in her throat. She cradled the severed head in her hands and knew, there was no doubt, that it was Ban's blood blade head, proof that the blade was the real deal. When her assistant tried to block her, the noblewoman snapped out a cold apology for her subordinate's rudeness, then told a guild representative to be fetched. claiming she'd pay a reward for the trouble. Snapping her gaze to the armored man, the noblewoman demanded that if they didn't believe her, he and his whole detachment would hit the road at once to hunt down the real criminal. And they wouldn't eat, sleep, or drink a drop until they dragged him out into the light. She whipped her head toward the person across from her and demanded they bring his head too, the same one that ended her brother, because all she lived for was revenge. The protagonist felt it. This aristocrat knew exactly how to spark fear. Then the subordinate snapped his head toward her, swore he'd never doubted him once, and begged his mistress for forgiveness. After the meeting, he and the guild representative leaned in and started hammering out the documents. And the protagonist was told to drop the seal in the exact right spot. Once he did, the deal was sealed as a done deal. Once everything was checked and confirmed, the order got sealed for good. Then Ban's head was handed over, and the employee bowed in thanks to Akyon for his hard work. Then she spun to the adventurer and told him to hang back once the formal stuff was done, and he nodded right away, while the noblewoman listened like a hawk, remembering the warrior's name, the one who'd brought her that head. Akon stayed stone calm and leaned in, asking the noblewoman if she had anything else to say, like he was ready to catch every word. At last, the noblewoman stepped forward with warm politeness, offering her full name, Zella Gant Hackless, and bowing low as she sincerely thanked him for wiping out Bloodblade Ban. That moment hit the warrior hard. He never saw something like this coming from a noble family. The employee finally confessed she never expected to see Akyon actually carrying out the order, and Akyon shot back with a faint, teasing irony, "You could have said the same thing." Then he admitted he was shocked to learn she wasn't just judging products. She said with a humble smile that she wasn't the only option today. Everyone else was just unavailable. With a stone-cold face, she dropped the wildest line of all, saying the corpses of criminals could count as food in a roundabout way, and the whole room went silent in shock. The employee burst in with, "It was just a joke," and instantly killed the tension, while Akin just sat there, mentally panicking about why he'd ended up surrounded by women who looked ready to scare him half to death. With her voice snapping into business mode, she urged Akin to cash out that huge sum right now, because lugging it around was a pain, and then she pressed him straight up. "So, what are you gonna do with the money?" Sensing his hesitation, the employee brightened up and promised she'd hand him some solid advice. In the tight confines of their trade guild's financial cell, she dangled that dope like a promise, assuring Akin they'd keep his money safe and sound. Akian clocked it instantly. The whole conversation was basically the guild flashing its banking services like an ad, and even though he felt a little thrown off, he just smirked and nodded, thinking, yeah, this could work. The girl practically sparkled with joy at his agreement, insisting it was the perfect choice. No regrets for a single second, then quickly jabbed at the papers and told him all he had to do was sign in 2 spots. This moment jolted the main character and snapped him back to something he couldn't forget. He shut out everything else, gripped the moment tight, and then it hit him. He finally remembered. He's determined to become an investor for the orphanage, pledging to use part of the money for a specific purpose. So he steps up and asks the employee to help him make it happen. Akian stared into the dark and admitted it straight. He felt zero remorse for killing Ban, replaying Ban's own words about his daughter stuck in the capital's orphanage, and that seal only hardened Akian's choice. After sorting out his business, Akyon ran through his evening routine, dumped the last 100,000 land into the game, and then headed right back to the hotel. Inside the hotel, the young man felt a nasty unease crawl up his spine, so he decided to find out what was going on, mentally bracing for whatever inspection awaited him. After gearing up and bracing for what came next, he leaned in and delivered his assessment. The system window flickered in front of his eyes, and his suspicions were dead right. New skills had unlocked for him, including asterisk game asterisk asterisk, daywalker asterisk asterisk, plus instant asterisk asterisk and silent step asterisk. A brand new skill yanked his focus, flash step. It felt familiar, like Ban's technique, because back then he'd spotted it the moment he stopped hearing his own footsteps. The thought of buying power with someone else's life made his stomach twist. He refused to turn people into dust for it, and now he was wrestling with a brutal question. Should he use his day walker skill to rip skills from other people? Tossing on his bed, he tried to wrap his head around what was happening, and couldn't tell if it was a blessing or a curse, but one thing hit hardest. He finally understood what was happening to him. His thoughts got cut off mid-spiral. Akian realized he just couldn't settle into sleep, like his body was exhausted, but his mind was still packed with too much information to shut down. Exhaustion crushed him and he thought, maybe a drink will knock me out and drown my worries. So he grabs the idea and heads outside. He remembered he could buy stuff right from the game menu, but it only let him snag tea, juice, or soda. So if he wanted anything stronger, he had to step out and buy real-life alcohol just like the real world. The moment he started thinking about alcohol, those drunken dreams came crashing back, and with them, that rare fruit. the super scarce one found only in the dungeons, whose juice went into the best liqueur they could make. So he snapped at the merchant, furious that he'd sold almost nothing because of it. Akyone flat out refused to buy snacks from the store, swearing he'd grabbed cheaper food through the game instead, and when the seller pushed dried meat with his drink, claiming it was all in stock, Akyone just smiled and politely turned him down. As he headed out, he wondered if alcohol would hit harder with friends, craving a drink at a crowded bar and a good chat over something strong. But the place was totally empty, and the moment he saw that, regret sank in. He turned back to the hotel, nursing a crushing loneliness. He suddenly realized, at least in theory, that he could brew his own wine and liqueurs with the game's grapes and fruit, but he also knew the risk. If he sold too much, he'd light a target on himself and attract unwanted attention. Right in the middle of his thoughts, everything snapped. He barely threw himself aside in time to dodge the sword's swing, and that blade came so close it nearly knocked his balance out of place. With lightning-fast reflexes, he still managed to rescue the glass bottle of alcohol. The moment the attack hit, the protagonist figured a lunatic was behind it. Until that maniac started ranting and blaming him, calling him old and saying his accusations got him kicked out of the group. Then Akyone snapped, realizing it was Lady Zella's subordinate. The young man froze in confusion. No way was this guy really tossed out just because he'd snapped in that same woman's presence. He felt the danger hit him and bolted into a deserted alley to dodge those nosy eyes, while rage burned in his chest. Why should he be blamed for someone else's garbage choices, and now this person was coming for his life? Seeing the warrior bolt, the pursuer snapped into a sprint after him, roaring for him to stop, his rage flaring because that young man dared to run. He rounded the corner and blurted in shock, looking down at his attacker like old man. But it was already too late to stop what came next. Back at the hotel, the system popped up the player's profile, and it just gained a new skill, provocation ***. The moment it appeared, unease crawled over the protagonist and a sharp, creeping horror filled his chest. The young man swallowed his pride and admitted, bitter as it tasted, that everything was on him. He was the one who dared to test his theory in real life. And still, rage at how unfair it all felt burned him alive. He acted on that idea and shoved the remains into the game. Then the system blasted him with a surprise reward. A recipe for a whole new kind of fertilizer, and it only made his unease grow worse. The horror of what he'd done curdled his drinking mood, and it all hit like a punch. He was finally sure his daywalker skill really let him steal other people's abilities. But the cost of knowing was brutally, painfully too high. A sudden thought hit him. He couldn't leave the booze sitting in the middle of the hotel, so he dragged it straight to his gaming space. Suddenly, a system window burst onto his game screen with a brand new mission: figure out how to make alcohol. And it taunted him that all the juicy details were waiting at the task desk. He was genuinely shocked. 10 years of grinding the game, and he'd basically wiped out every quest it ever offered. So where on earth did this brand new assignment just pop out from? The mission finally made sense. You had to build a winery right beside your mansion, and if you pulled it off, you'd unlock recipes for all kinds of alcohol. But only if you used the exact specific materials they demanded. His thoughts raced, then it hit him. The game wouldn't hand him those resources, not even close. So the only way to finish the job meant going outside the game. With a chilling snap of truth, he realized one thing: he'd have to disappear underground, and that thought hit him like a blade. Pure fear mixed with iron determination. A few days went by after he got that new mission, and he was right back on his feet, selling potions and fruits, then cracking down on his training again, and whenever he had leftovers, he'd slip the remaining fruit to the 3 girls he knew. Rage hit him as he finally admitted he should have started that quest ages ago, but even worse. He kept seeing his own excuses sink in, with no real deadline to force him forward, so he kept postponing everything. Regret surged through his chest. He knew he should have moved sooner, but the moment had already slipped away. After thinking it through, he finally locked in his choice. He was still heading into that dungeon because the quest demanded it. With a sudden, ear-splitting sneeze, Akyone, still clutching the joystick, jerked his gaze out of the virtual reality and whipped around, scanning the room. A sharp wind whipped through the room, and before he even realized it, the chill had taken over, so he couldn't stop sneezing. The coming shift in seasons and the massive expedition looming ahead pushed him to sprint through his preparations because the moment he started, he knew he'd win the race. He took a deep breath, checked every bit of his gear, and found it all locked in perfect condition, essentials already set and his stuff packed tight, like he was finally ready to go. His quest was simple: reach that western city where the dungeon he needed hid. And as the excitement hit, he blurted it out loud, snapping heads from the folks strolling nearby. He yelled it like a pep talk, but the moment it left his mouth, a weird, awkward chill hit him. Then the carriage jolted forward and he mentally clocked it. The trek to the western dungeon would take about 5 days. Akyone couldn't stop thinking about how many days he could shave off the trip. Then he made a bold choice. He'd hit the road on foot and trust his own strength to reach the destination. He sprinted the whole way, and Akian saw it as the perfect chance to push his limits and prove his strength. Then he shoved his fist up with pride, already buzzing with confidence for the adventure ahead. After all that time, he finally pulled over for rest breaks, grinning as he happily got back on the joystick, like it was old comfort. He realized he couldn't truly relax until the sweat poured out the right way, so the brutal road training saved him, even if it came with one ugly catch. Every workout drenched him in an endless flood of sweat. During the stop, Akian hit the jackpot. Anything he shoved into his game space came out spotless. So he scrubbed his towel and armor clean, but don't get it twisted. It wouldn't repair the damage, it only erased the grime. Even after that brutal long journey, the adventurer still dug into his daily stash of magic cherries, boosting his powers one bite at a time. He glanced at his status through the system window, and there it was. His stats had surged and double strike had been unlocked. Akyon grinned, realizing all that daily grind, like munching cherries and training non-stop, was way more powerful than he ever imagined. Once he finished his daily chores, he snapped into action with pure determination, finally feeling that first surge of relief, but knowing the road ahead stretched miles longer. After 3 days of brutal travel, he finally slammed into the borders of the new city, massive, roaring with life and progress. And even Akian, who'd seen the capital, couldn't help but admit this place wasn't all that smaller. First, he sprinted straight to the Adventurers Guild, and after they ran the confirmation, they handed him a registration card that officially made him a bronze-ranked adventurer. He bowed and thanked the official before moving on. The guild member clocked that winter was creeping in and grilled Akon. "So you're really marching into the dungeon now?" Akon nodded and told him yes, then leaned in, curious, asking if the season had anything to do with what the dungeon was like. The employee said that when winter dumps snow everywhere, most above-ground jobs vanish, so everyone crowds into the dungeon, since it's sealed from the weather, and that's why it gets packed solid with adventurers. So the employees practically begged Akin to lock in a long-term hotel contract early, because spots were limited, and even hooked him up with a special deal from the Guildrun Hotel. The protagonist caught himself thinking the guild staff were starting to feel just like those slick consultants from modern stores. Quick smiles, sharper tricks, and a pitch for every service. Soon he burst up to the dungeon entrance, right as people poured inside, and stared at the archway in awe because that beautiful gateway just grabbed everyone's attention. He clocked that the dungeon was the local ruler's property, yet the Adventurers Guild ran the whole show, so Akyon knew the usual deal. Before anyone stepped inside for the first time, they got the rules laid out, and they had to show a registration card to get in. His eyes swept across the harsh rules on the wall: card registration every time he came and went, and the chilling deceased status, and the whole thing ended with one short, heavy warning: be careful. Right at the dungeon gates, the protagonist practically shook with excitement, because the dream he'd once thrown away was finally back on the table, and he was about to step into the unknown. The moment Akon stepped into the dungeon, dread slammed into his gut. Inside, everything looked like a twisted maze of dark, gloomy walls, and battle roars hit from every direction, squeezing the air out of his chest. Even with the tension still crackling in the air, he couldn't help grinning as he pushed on, emotion crashing through him like a wave. Because the warrior knew he couldn't stop now, he had to keep driving forward. Rounding the corner, he heard monsters roaring somewhere nearby, and he peered out with a tight grip on his nerves, barely breathing, refusing to make a sound. His eyes snapped onto 5 goblins that hadn't spotted him yet. Akian braced tight, sure he could take them, and then he committed to the perfect ambush. After wiping out the goblins, he let out a huge breath of relief. Turns out it was way easier than he'd feared, and that sudden twist factor hit him like a shock. He couldn't believe it. Those goblins really had turned into magic stones, exactly like the rules promised. And the moment he saw it, something clicked in his head as he started rummaging through everything he knew about the dungeons. Because corpses turn into magic stones, the whole thing was insanely profitable. And that success lit a fire in him as he started dreaming. How far into the dungeon could he push, and what kind of fortune could he pull out? Knowing this place was a trap, Akian warned himself to stay sharp, move steady, and never swing first, because his treasure hunt wasn't about charging in blind. A weird sign grabbed his attention. Then, the closer he got, the more he realized it wasn't just any marker at all. It was a portal that would spit him right back to the dungeon entrance, and yep, every floor had one. Akian stared at the portal like it was a video game save point, then snapped, "That's it, training done for today." He realized the system was pure convenience, jumped back to the entrance now, and later hopped straight to the exact floor he'd reached earlier. After that first wild trip, he added it up: 5 goblins dead, and the magic stones paid him 3,000 lin. The money felt tiny in his hands, so he realized he'd have to dive deeper if he wanted real income. He also realized that if more monsters showed up, he'd be crushed trying to survive solo as their numbers swelled. Then loud, noisy adventurers stormed in and snapped his focus. Someone's voice kept insisting, over and over, that their group just wasn't fit to work together. And even after all the persuading, they still brushed off the whole conversation, like the main character was the only one who cared. When the address hit his ears, Old Man bit back the urge to stir things up again. After that last incident, he wanted zero fresh trouble, so he stayed out of it and slipped past the disputants quietly, determined to never get pulled into someone else's fight ever again. Someone screamed for help in pure panic, and the cry slammed straight into the young man's ears, even though he desperately wanted to dodge trouble. Then he felt it. Someone was hiding right behind his back. Meanwhile, one attacker snapped with furious shouts that nobody had asked the warrior to step in, while the protagonist fumed, wondering why he was always getting thrown back into this mess, only to realize the people he was trying to protect were already gone. The aggressor, furious at the interruption, launched at him and roared that if he wanted trouble, he'd get it all at once, while Achaean seethed that they didn't even give him a single chance to speak. Seeing it was about to go bad, he slammed on the brakes mid-swing and stopped the fist inches from his face. Then he urged the attacker to cool off and settle it peacefully. After sizing up his own power, the attacker saw his fist locked in a grip backed by unstoppable force. So he snapped into clear thinking, knew he couldn't win that clash, and backed off. With the fight finally behind them, both sides pulled back and the protagonist let out a breath of relief, because at least one person actually heard him. Akyone slipped back to the inn, grabbed a small supper and crashed into bed early, locking his mind onto tomorrow in the dungeon. Honestly, he was wiped out, so sleep swallowed him fast and that carefree night slipped by in the blink of an eye. The very next morning, someone suddenly called him out, and these faces felt completely unfamiliar. Turns out those weren't random strangers at all. They were two girls, a magician and a priestess whom he'd accidentally saved yesterday. They thanked him and one of them blinked in shock like, "Wait, didn't we meet the day before?" The girls admitted, a little embarrassed, that they'd been watching him from around the corner, and they'd made sure he was strong enough. The protagonist pressed them for answers. "What do you want from me?" Still drained and completely lost from everything that happened yesterday. They popped in with smiles and said, "We're a great team, a magician and a priestess," then practically dragged him into their crew for dungeon trips, and all because of what the main character did. They were sure they'd click perfectly together. Akiyoung weighed the offer to team up with the girls, and for a moment he felt his age had sucked all hope dry, until their talk about needing solid protection from the front hit him like a spark. Doubt and curiosity wrestled inside his chest. Even with doubt crawling through him, Akon stayed polite but snapped a firm no. Yet the girls wouldn't take it, zeroing in on their chance to make him go only once. Akiyan let out a tired breath and faced the pressure head-on. He couldn't bow out a second time, so he finally gave in and the girls burst into shocked cheers. Right then, they practically raced to introduce themselves. Misha, the magician, stepped up first and declared she was the third daughter of an aristocrat, showing off proudly that she'd come to learn through experience. And then the second girl, Sis, the priestess, spoke softly, saying she'd grown up in a temple. Misha kept going, insisting they were friends and that both of them hailed from the same city of magic. She broke it down like this. She's the attacking mage and Sis is the support. Then she hit them with the real secret. Magic has two base traits, demonic and holy, and everything else is forged by mixing those. Misha made it clear that pure magic, the divine kind, has a terrible reputation in society. And the protagonist shot back that Sis is quiet while Misha is basically pure chaos. Then Sis finally decided to ask the protagonist's name. Right away, the protagonist flashed a quick introduction, an adventurer living in the capital, and admitted he'd been itching to try something new lately. Then he said his name was Akiyan. With the acquaintance finally wrapped up, the capital's adventurer leaned in and pushed for something crazier, going underground. And once they were inside, he decided the less said about his game, the better. The girls, especially Misha, were totally thrown off by his rush. Akon, already daydreaming about showing up in front of the group, told them to wait just a minute and the girls stared back at him like, "Wait, what?" Akiyan blurted that he'd sprint to the inn to swap into the right gear for the dungeon. As he came back, the protagonist shot out an apology for the delay, and Misha narrowed her eyes, muttering that he'd kept her waiting so long before calling him uncle. The girl's eyes lit up at his brand new gear, a mace and a shield, so Misha blinked in shock and demanded, "Did you really ditch your spear and the rest of your stuff?" Then she warned him loud and clear that if he got killed in the dungeon, he'd lose everything. Akian just gave a tight, reserved smile and said he already knew the rules. With pure determination blazing in his chest, he declared the dungeon was waiting. And as he pushed forward, he vowed to use his game stash to leave the enemies with nothing worth taking. After a while, a problem hit hard. He'd gotten so used to fighting solo that he hogged every opponent and snatched all the loot too, leaving the girls with zero chances. In the first minutes of the joint battle, Akian's nerves were everywhere. He kept snapping up every opponent like a machine, until it hit him he'd messed up and he blurted out a sheepish apology. Then slowly, step by step, he finally started to click with the team. Each time they climbed to a new dungeon floor, the enemies multiplied and the fights got relentless. Akyon called out targets for Misha's fire spells with total confidence, then snapped to Sis for protection right when it mattered. Out of the dark, a monster explodes forward and sinks its teeth into the real adventurer's hand, but he doesn't panic. He stays cool and handles it with pure skill. Finally catching his breath after the endless fights, he whips his head around, and there, scattered nearby, lie the monster corpses or what's left of them. From the wreckage, magic stones gleam in all kinds of properties and sizes. Akian stared at his own progress, shocked, because just a while ago he would have bolted from a crowd of monsters without a second glance, and now he stood his ground, refusing to flinch. Even the trials ahead didn't spark fear in him. They lit a fire of pure excitement. After he checked everything through the game menu, he lined up his stats against the guild instructor's numbers, and boom, it was crystal clear. His level had already blown past the instructor. That kind of win can't help but make you feel unstoppable. Akyon kept plunging downward, and confidence surged through him. When he synced up with the crew, every skirmish snapped into place like clockwork, pushing the whole team forward. Snagging the way up to the 6th floor, he called for a quick breather, then set his sights on that final make-or-break dash into the dungeon's depths, and when he did, he glanced back, bracing for the next brawl. The girls choked out messy groans, spent to the bone after non-stop fighting, heads hanging low as they dragged themselves along, barely moving. Sis, skin stretched pale and shaking like a leaf, could barely stay upright, her mind chanting, "I just want to go home." And Misha snapped back with furious noise, gripping her staff so hard her knuckles went white. Then they kept grumbling about the goblin's ugly look, and Sis just kept insisting she was exhausted. Akian, stunned by how bad they'd gotten, blurted, "So you wanna retreat?" The girls only stared at each other. Akyon snapped his eyes over the scene. Those girls were running on fumes. While he felt like he still had fight left in him for ages, he chose to retreat, already counting his wins. He'd snatched a solid pile of magic stones, so he figured, "That's enough, I'm out." Akiyang nodded to himself and said straight up that today was over. When Misha and Sis heard the sortie was done, they erupted in joy, thanking the gods. Because after all that, they were absolutely wiped out. Back at the guild, the employee snapped an apology for the quick wait and handed them the money they earned from the magic stones. Those coins were stacked high like a little mountain, and the pile looked seriously impressive. Once every coin was counted, the total hit an insane 20,000 lineage, and the girls lit up with shocked smiles. Plus, the main character's mood instantly shot up the moment he heard that number. Akon got swallowed by his own thoughts, figuring the deeper he went, the more and better magic stones he'd find, certain tomorrow's floors would be even richer. Then a familiar voice snapped him back to reality again. The happy girls figured it was over for now, waved the main character goodbye, and promised they'd meet up again in a week. Their proposal left our adventurer totally stumped. He finally snapped out of his own head. All he could manage was a wild counter question, full of raw confusion, because his plans to go tomorrow got wiped out in an instant. Then the protagonist snapped again, "Why exactly a week?" Like he wanted it sooner, while Misha just shrugged, saying he couldn't see why he was so shocked because a week really wasn't that long. Misha kept talking and snapped that they had to grab magical supplies first, because mages can't function without magic, while warriors don't have that problem since they can handle both defense and attack no matter what. Seeing he was still totally lost, she lined in and told him magic comes in two main ways to learn. But since he wasn't a mage, she understood he might just have never heard any of this. The young mage told him this. No matter which path you choose, learning magic lets you stamp the magic mechanism into your mind like a glowing magic circle. Either you train under a seasoned mage, or you grab the right components from a magic guild. Akian remembered a magic circle he'd seen back when he was learning the appraisal spell, and at the time he barely cared. But now the pieces were finally clicking into place. She stressed that the theory wasn't the finish line. After learning it, you had to drill relentlessly until magic became pure reflex, especially the attack spells that demanded instant, pinpoint activation. Training was non-negotiable. That's why the girls need a weak Misha to handle the shopping and keep practicing magic, while Sis locks in for intense prayers at the church. Because Sis's holy magic lives or dies by how tightly she's connected to the deity, and without that bond, they can't function as a real team. Once he grasped what was really driving them, he nodded and agreed, because their reason wasn't cold or objective at all. Akian replayed that walk from the guild, replayed how mages and warriors kept snapping at each other over the same kind of problems. And then boom, everything clicked and the truth finally landed. Now he had to rip up his plans. Should he really just sit around all week? He got why she was pushing for it, but their magic needed prep, and waiting felt downright irrational to him. After thinking it through, Akyon hesitated, voice shaky, then suggested they cut the preparation time. because he couldn't stand the idea of wasting a full week, especially when the dungeon trips weren't even that effective. Sis erupted in protest. She had to have time for her prayers, and there was no way to cut that period short. Misha nodded right along at the priestess, and the protagonist finally understood it. The schedule couldn't bend, and it wasn't getting moved. He wrestled with his options in silence. There was no way he'd bend over to someone else's messy schedule. Sure, the group helped, but this grind was draining him, so he had to hunt down a better plan. Suddenly, it hit him. He didn't have to sit in the hotel and just wait for those two young magicians, so once he made his call, the protagonist stepped in with a compromise. He laid the plan out crystal clear. Mages would prep for a full week like we agreed, and while that happened, he'd push deeper into the dungeon solo. If anyone lost interest by the time they met, that was on them, not him. Then he asked point-blank if they were cool with those terms. After that talk, he drags himself upstairs, dead tired, while outside the world is already pitch black, and every window in the building glows like it's still alive. Once he reaches his room, he flops onto the bed and lifts his head just a little. Breathing hard, he finally lets out a tired sigh. Today wiped him out, mind and body. As memories of his wild adventures crash in, he doesn't want to relive a second of it. He just wants to drop and fall asleep. That last conversation crushed him. Those young mages nodded along and agreed on the plan to send a Cheon into the dungeon alone. And even though it all turned out fine, the whole atmosphere drained him and his mood sank. Replaying this conversation in his head, the main character steamed with rage, convinced today's youth had gotten too disillusioned and stopped respecting their elders. And since they pushed for it, he had to swallow it and make concessions too. His head throbbed with tension, and nasty thoughts kept slamming the brakes on his focus. In those moments, Akyon had one stress cure on lock, delicious food, and without a second thought, he pulled out 20 golden cherries from his supplies, glowing like pure temptation. At the end of the day, he fired up the system interface like always and scanned the full list, then gritted his teeth when the luck stat just wouldn't budge. So now he couldn't stop thinking, maybe his rotten luck wasn't random at all. Maybe it was tied straight to every tough, clash-filled run-in he'd had with other people. He brushed those thoughts off like dust and refused to spiral over them now. Because the real truth was, he'd planned to hit the dungeons alone from the very start. That spark hit him like a lightning bolt. Now was the moment to finally test his brand new, long-awaited gear, and the very next day, he was ready to go. Akon strutted in a full set of solid iron armor, gripping every heavy piece like it meant business. No scuffs, no flaws, just perfect quality built to last. Before stepping into the dangerous dungeon, the protagonist clenched his resolve and swore he'd push as deep as he possibly could. Because this was his moment to test his limits and prove it to himself solo. On the dungeon's 6th floor, the protagonist braced himself for brand new trials. Alone, while thick fog swallowed the stone vaults, the walls went pitch black and the air felt suffocatingly heavy. Somewhere far off, footsteps echoed like they were coming for him. As the goblins swarmed him, he snapped on instant step, juked out of every hit, and slammed his mace down in brutal double strikes, crushing them in seconds, while his armored gloves clamped the handle like they meant business. Slashing through monsters, he found that hunting them worked way better than last time on his very first run. Between each fight, he stumbled on magic stones of all colors and sizes, and grabbing them felt crazy satisfying. A couple more days flew by, and on the 3rd day inside the dungeon, Akihan grinned because the new mace fit him like it was made for him. Its weight and balance let him unleash crushing, pinpoint swings that could smash right through the thick skulls of monsters. Heavy iron armor crushed the danger. Fangs, claws, even stray arrows bounced off like they meant nothing. And while his movement was slowed, his skills made him untouchable, turning him into an invincible tank. And pulling off that perfect balance was a real win for the main character. In the dark dungeon, there was just one lonely torch, but that was all he needed. Because Solitude's real power wasn't armor or weapons at all, no one bothered him, and no one even bothered to watch. He could duck out for a breather anytime. No strangers around meant it was his safe haven with zero trouble. And since his armor was removable, even that never got in his way. As the party came to a stop, Akihan shoved the heavy loot, magic stones, and his game inventory out of sight, and when he looked up, he grinned. He'd even laid out a fancy table with goodies from the game store inside the dungeon itself. All that was left now was to scan the area. After tearing into a juicy chicken for dinner, he tossed back the virtual luxury and surged into the gloomy corridor, brimming with fresh strength. Because the game had turned that brutal slog into a smooth, feel-good adventure. After a while, he finally spotted a massive door ahead, flanked by 2 roaring torches, and even though he'd never seen it himself, he'd definitely heard the stories. So yeah, he figured it out. That had to be it. He planted himself before a towering door carved with nasty, ominous runes, no doubt in his mind that this was the boss's lair. And then he faced a brutal choice. Stay on the floor or step through that door and go straight for the boss. For a heartbeat, cold fear slammed into him, and the idea of running away surged louder in his head. He backed up a careful, willing step, gripping his shield tight. Even then, he had to weigh every move like his life depended on it, because it did. The protagonist snapped upright. He'd already made his choice. Fear wasn't getting the last word. With bold steps, he strode to the door and yanked it open, and the heavy metal finally groaned and gave way to Akyon's raw strength. Inside, goblins swarmed in every shape and size, shield bearers looming, dagger wielders ready to strike, and even a few mages standing out in the crowd. Some wore capes and light armor for ranged combat, while the toughest brutes slammed on heavy armor to tear their enemies apart. He darted behind the wall and leaned out from the corner to size everything up. Then he realized the real nightmare was the numbers. Because with that many enemies, even a full team would struggle, so he started hunting for the one best move. With that tight, tense stare, he finally clocked it. This was the boss's room, so these goblins weren't just ordinary, they had special skills. Now the real problem hit him. How was he supposed to handle this huge, deadly crowd by himself, charging straight in? Yeah, bad idea. A wild thought hit him like lightning. Could his Daywalker skill actually fry monsters? He'd only ever used it on humans, but now the real question screamed in his head. Would it work on creatures that were nothing like people, with minds just as alien? Akon figured he had nothing left to lose, so he launched his experiment anyway. His own life was on the line, but he still grabbed the risk, whatever it cost. He focused on his armor, slammed the skill Daywalker asterisk to life, and aimed it straight at the goblins nearby. Then the system flashed that it was activated, and there was no turning back. Relief hit him, his skill finally worked. A dark, ominous aura snapped around the hero, and in the next heartbeat Akyon's armor suddenly felt crushingly heavy, so he yanked it off fast. Helmet in both hands, he drew a sharp breath and swore it was time, his turn to strike. Still muttering that the armor felt awful again, he glanced down only to see it. Under Wanderer's skill, his face had subtly shifted, his ears turned a bit more pointed, and even one tooth sharpened into a fang like he was Akon anymore. Suddenly, one of the big goblins, somehow bursting out of a blind spot, came charging in with full rage, smashing the adventurer out of his trance, and the spear drove clean through, gutting him completely. He snapped his eyes to the side at that surprise strike, his mind clocking just how brutal it was. The hit landed like a hammer and made him stagger, but because the hero was tough and skilled, it clearly hurt, yet it didn't break him. He snapped that ambushing people out of nowhere is straight up rude, then twisted into an unnatural form to baffle the goblin that just hit him, before landing a pinpoint headshot the very next second and shutting him down for good. An unknown creature, probably a vampire that had hijacked Acheon's body, rose up and barked that everyone would finally witness what a vampire can do in a fight, then insisted the body's real owner would absolutely listen to its command. Right after those words left his mouth, he launched into action. An explosive chant of skills tore through the goblins in seconds, and even with all their bodies stacked in numbers, they never stood a chance. One by one, they vanished from the battlefield. The talking vampires sneered at their so-called ties to mere mortals, and he snapped that they weren't just monsters. They bent life itself and chased its wildest, most extreme forms. Then he drove the message home until they couldn't forget it. Then the whole vibe snapped into something calm, his voice declared, "That's it for now." But right after that, like he suddenly remembered, he hurriedly urged everyone to study at least a little magic. He finished the thought and said that only then could he figure out how to fight back against her. And right then, relief hit him hard as he realized he was finally getting his body back. With the Daywalker skill shut off, Akyon snapped back to his body. His ears looked normal again, and his teeth were exactly like before too. But even then, a restless heat crawled through him, and his mind wouldn't stop tangling. He stared at what just went down, jaw-dropping, blurting, "What happened?" Because he was standing smack in the middle of a room carpeted in magical stones, all blazing in every rainbow color. Akyon stared into the chaos of his own mind, wondering if his aimless daytime roaming was just another case of 8th grader syndrome, or proof that something else lived inside him, a second self wearing his skin. He admitted this was the only logical answer he could think of, because that vampire clearly knew the full playbook on vampires and their techniques, and it was knowledge he'd never had. Stuck in his own thoughts, he blurted his theory out loud. Then after mulling it over for a while, he snapped back to reality and wondered why he was even doing this right now, only to realize he'd basically answered the question himself, so he kept going. First, he decided to test his theory and figure out what skills those people should have had, so he pressed his hand to the magic circle, and it snapped to life at once. Boom, right on cue, a system status window blasted onto the screen. Strength jumped to 105, health hit 105, speed climbed to 56, magic rose to 43, and luck stayed brutally low at just 5. Besides the usual stats, Akyon was hit with a wild shock. The skill count had exploded upward. That made him realize stealing skills might not be a human-only trick. He then stared at one of the skills and his jaw dropped. That skill even made him feel mortified. He panicked on the spot, blurted that he'd never dated a day in his life, declared the whole thing useless, and prayed he could just never use it again, then frantically scanned the area for anything at all, to stop it from activating. After a while, he finally exhaled in relief because he'd cracked it. He figured out how to shut the effect down, and the crazy part was the skill had been sealable this whole time. With the danger handled, he realized the other skills were still useful, so there was no need to touch them. Next, he charged into collecting magic crystals, and they were scattered all over the floor of the room. The moment he pictured coins, his mood skyrocketed. He practically cheered, blabbing about money and the harvest. This wasn't hard labor at all. It pumped him up and kept driving him forward. Akon's eyes snapped to the bag tangled among the rocks, and he immediately guessed. If it fell with the rubble, it had to be something magical, so he gripped his courage and fired up his appraisal skill to find out exactly what it was. As the young man studied the strange find, awe hit him hard at the details. Then he realized it could cram enough for a whole room, and the joy turned into a grin when he saw why it mattered, since he couldn't use the game with anyone else around. Slipping the bag on, he tested it and grinned. The fit was perfect. And without wasting a second, he went straight to trying out his brand new stolen skills after finishing up his main business. Akyone clenched his resolve to cast the fire arrow spell, locked onto the spot Misha told him about, marked it in his mind, and let it fly. His arrow tore off at breakneck speed, blazing a furious trail of fire behind it. Right at the wall, he noticed what Misha meant about the training. Then when his strike cracked the surface, he still aimed at a different spot than the one that took the hit, and that realization hit hard. Without real effort and smart adjustments, he'd never land the result he was chasing, so he let out a heavy sigh. When he looked back, it hit him. Nearly a week had already flown by since he agreed to meet the two mages and dive deeper into that dungeon together. And now he had to scramble to finish the preparations before that meeting. Akyone told himself he'd be a lot more comfortable alone, at least until the promise hit him in the chest and he couldn't back out, even as he admitted company could sometimes be fun. With a small smile and a resigned sigh, he geared up to head back. He shot his fist up, yelled that he was already on his way back, pumped himself up, and headed for the dungeon exit again. Sure, the route wasn't the quickest, but nothing dangerous happened along the way. When the adventurer finally popped back up to the surface, he stared at a completely normal, crystal-clear day, tiny clouds drifting overhead, while the guild carried on at its usual pace, letting him slip inside and start hunting answers. Because the main character got there early, he jumped right into trading stones instead of sitting around waiting. Until out of nowhere, a voice he'd never forget snapped his name from across the place. It was Masha, and it turned out she and the others had slipped in early too. Akyone lets out a calm breath from that familiar voice, then admits he never thought they'd show up this fast. Because the moment he stares a little closer, something feels off, and before he can even finish, the protagonist is left utterly baffled by what's happening. Mortified, the girl blurted out apologies, then pointed at the group, stammering that it'd be safer for everyone to scatter. Because that boy was standing between the mages, grinning as he watched Akyone with satisfaction. With a fierce grip, she slammed down her decision. She was going to join forces with someone else, and as she held the protagonist's hand, she made it crystal clear she wouldn't budge. The mage had already settled every last detail. That young guy, still a little pleased, shot an apology right then, admitting he'd stumbled into the team by pure accident. Akyone, crushed and totally lost, blurted out why this was happening even though he'd proved himself. His hurt and confusion just spilled out, impossible to hide. Sis spoke in a calm, merciless tone and flat-out explained why. Then the other guy's sheer strength towered over her, and those words smashed straight into the protagonist's heart, like Sis was handing her a death sentence. His face snapped into a whole new mood, and he knew arguing wouldn't solve a thing. It would only spark bigger trouble in front of everyone, so he swallowed it, told them he understood, and pressed forward. He flashed a fake smile, gave a half-hypocritical nod, lifted his thumb high, and acted like he fully agreed. Then Marie immediately jumped in, saying Akon would get it right away. Without even blinking, the girl cut the conversation short and blurted that they were heading for the dungeon now. Then she waved off the main character with zero hesitation. Soon after, she and the others headed off, leaving the man alone with his thoughts as they made straight for that dungeon. All alone, the protagonist kept waving after them for a beat, a tiny smile tugging at his face. Then when they vanished, a helpless sigh escaped him, and anyone who witnessed it felt their hearts ache for him. An elderly warrior in the crowd clocked the shaken youth, slapped him on the shoulder, and told him not to lose heart, saying today's youth were selfish. Then Akyone, surprised for a split second, shot back that he was totally fine. After a moment of deep thought, he realized this was actually a win for him, and to his shock, the protagonist didn't even panic. Instead, confidence swelled in his chest, and a spark of joy hit him as one of his biggest problems vanished. The old warrior admitted in a low voice that he'd tried teams before, but they'd all gone wrong and he hadn't found success. The adventurer nodded like he already got it, like he'd just resigned himself to the truth. And when the warrior finally looked up, he seemed a bit older than a Kihan, with a faint stubble shadowing his face. The man mumbled his take, then sighed that he wished these brutal showdowns wouldn't be staged out in the open, right in front of everyone, because that same tired move was getting painfully hackneyed. He snapped back into business mode, strode up to the merchant, and held out his magic bag. "Swap these stones for cash," he demanded. The moment the guild employee saw the bag, she grinned and promised to fetch a bigger container, then she headed back and continued. She smiled and requested that every single stone be placed into a special container she'd prepared, basically a round plate with tiny raised edges, so you could pack in way more stones than usual. Just a split second later, the hero finally got it and blasted every last magic stone out in one rush. They dropped cleanly, piling into a pretty huge mound, and the container caught them so none of them scattered. When the staff member saw that mountain of power, they couldn't believe it. She shot him a quick reassurance. Everything was fine, and the counting would be over in no time. And she figured the stones must have been stacking up for ages, even if Akon didn't get why it felt so awkward, like something must have gone wrong. Once the counting was done, the protagonist practically exploded with shock. He blurted out how insane the amount was, and the merchant swore that for every stone he'd get 600,000 lin. And get this, it was 30 times more than his last dungeon run. As the employee handed over the payment, he smiled politely and told Akon to bring the stones more often next time, warning that big sums are way too easy to mess up. So Akon just nodded, sheepish as ever. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto his shoulder, jolting him to attention, and before the shock even faded, the adventurer instantly knew exactly who it was. That same stubbled warrior, who'd been lurking behind them and gripping a Cheon by the shoulder, leaned in with a proud, approving nod, and he pointed out one thing clear as day. The magicians had traded a real diamond for an untested kid. After he finally laid out his thoughts on the group, the older warrior burst into laughter and teased that Akon could have just said he wanted to toss these young kids aside. The adventurer mulled it over, and then, boom, he realized he felt way better now. The protagonist stopped dead, let out a slow breath, and felt the bitter truth hit. He'd always been the kind of person groups left behind. It irritated him for a second, but it didn't crush him at all. It actually lifted his mood. After a brutal day, the young man crashed into the hotel, ready to drown his stress in food, and slid into ordering a steaming bowl of rice topped with a sizzling pork cutlet. Then he grabbed his chopsticks and went straight to town. As he dug into his meal, he tore the cutlet into bite-sized pieces and mixed it with rice, and with every mouthful the dark thoughts melted away until the hot, crispy aroma of fried meat filled the room. Once dinner was gone, the protagonist kept going. With his chopsticks clacking onto the empty plate, the adventurer flashed a satisfied grin and thanked the cook, because the meal was done, and now he had one last mission to finish. He stormed back to his room, flopped onto the comfy bed, and shut the world out. Because it was game time, plain and simple, he snatched up the joystick and fully vanished into the fun. The sky slowly swallowed the sunlight as Akon snapped in his own mind, "I'm done with this inventory." He swore he wouldn't touch the dungeon tomorrow either. He'd spend the whole night gaming until exhaustion dragged him down. Once he made that decision, he wasted zero time and went straight to it. In the morning, it turned out to be a bad call. He stumbled awake, sleep-deprived, with puffy eyes that looked like he'd lost a fight overnight, grabbed his breakfast and carried it on a tray, then admitted his choice wasn't the smartest, but still no regrets. After picking the spot, he dropped into a comfy seat then, since Akian had gone for Japanese food yesterday. He went with plain bread and a warm bowl of soup for breakfast, just to mix it up. He wished himself a good appetite, shrugged off any plans, and ate at the inn. Lounging in that cozy calm, he caught the mouth-watering smell of breakfast wafting through the air, warmed his belly with every bite. Then a sudden cry ripped through the room and snapped his focus to whatever was happening. Boom! Someone shouted that a crew called Steelfeather had arrived, and with just a glance you could tell they weren't rookies. 4 total, 3 men and 1 girl. Before anyone could catch their breath, the voice snapped to another squad of Fireblade already here, armored to shrug off every hit, while a towering warrior in bulky steel stood front and center, clearly calling the shots for the whole team. The young man froze when he heard both group names, and his mind sprinted, scrambling for where he'd heard them before, just as Akian pushed his thoughts onward and kept going. He'd never even heard of them, but the way everyone around him freaked out, these bands were big time. The crowd was buzzing, trading hype like it was currency, and then someone tossed out a bet. Which band would be the first to conquer the 30th floor? He clocked that both groups had good-looking people, but his eyes snagged hardest on the girl in the steel feather. She felt like Zira, the one who'd been chasing Ban, so he couldn't stop wondering who she really was and what she'd been through. After staring at his reflection and catching the truth, he shrugged it off like it wasn't his fight and carried on with his breakfast. Then, once he was done, he chewed and thought again about the food. He stumbled out of the tavern and started spiraling over what to do next, but with no real plan in his head, Acheon wandered past the houses, hunting for ideas, while the sun blazed overhead and scattered dazzling light across the rooftops. Suddenly, it hit him 3 things he'd totally blown off: grabbing the magic components, getting ready for the next dungeon descent, and hunting down intel on the treants out there and what threats might be lurking. Seeing the mountain of tasks stacked in front of him, the young man blushed with embarrassment. Too many plans all at once. The protagonist had braced for 0, but instead there were 3 staring him down, and total confusion splashed across his face. Acheon didn't waste a second. He already knew where to begin, rushed to the guild, and slid up to the info desk to demand answers about the trance and the dungeon monsters. The employee then heard him out and asked the question again. Eventually, the hero figured out that dangerous monsters started crawling out on the dungeon's 30th floor, and they were a real nightmare for lone adventurers. So yeah, he also caught that the employee's answer came off pretty rude. She picked up her tail and said the hot new record hit the 40th floor, shut down by a crew called Hero's Sword. Then told Acheon to team up with the groups she'd just introduced, because right then they were dropping all the way down to the 30th floor. With her palms clasped and a bright smile, the employee didn't hesitate. She told him the guild would gladly accept his request and make sure he got the services he needed. She got exactly what he meant, so he locked his index fingers together, hesitated, and finally promised he'd think it over, because he had other plans waiting in the wings. Staring down the 30th floor, the young man figured he'd done enough already to try it solo first. Then, if it went sideways, he'd file an official request through the guild. Once his mind was made up, he headed straight down the right path. After what felt like forever, he finally spotted the perfect spot. The sign gleamed with a magic staff on it, and Acheon's heart raced, because this had to be the magic shop he'd been hunting for. The shop assistant smiled politely, clocked his every move, and instantly figured he'd never been here before, like it was written on his face, not just guessed. The protagonist nodded along with her sharp question, and the employee jumped in to explain the store's purpose and the lineup it carries, so Acheon leaned in and listened, completely locked on. The saleswoman snapped a quick explanation of the shop's purpose. You can buy spells here, and you can study them too, so yeah, the protagonist wasn't wrong. Then she dove into it, breaking down every magic option and sliding a list her way, politely warning that what you can use hinges on your rank, offering to clear up anything that didn't make sense. And Acheon thanked her from the bottom of his heart. When it came to picking spells, he couldn't decide. Then he finally went with the ones he always leaned on in games, trusting the same familiar logic to guide him. After scanning the list, the adventurer locked in his picks, snatching up 7 spells: light defenses against both physical and magic hits, boosts to sharp cuts and straight punches, plus healing and antidotes. But it came with a brutal price tag, 300,000 L of pure cash. When he saw that payment number, the protagonist froze in pure shock, because after paying it all, it finally clicked. This is why Frommery kept preaching about magic debts, and yeah, it turns out magic is brutally, insanely expensive. The seller snapped a warning into the young man's ears. This imprinting magic circle in his mind could hurt like hell, so if it got too brutal, he should hold nothing back and scream, and the specialist's face instantly twisted with shock. At first he understood nothing, then, boom, everything kicked in, and Acheon couldn't stop himself from letting out brutal screams as the pain hit way harder than he expected, while he mentally counted down the seconds. Once it was done, he turned right back. Still reeling from the brutal pain, the protagonist stumbled down the street and gulped a breath, stunned. He never saw magic hurt like this before, and he couldn't help wondering if there were gentler ways to learn it. Even after the pain finally faded, the young man snapped into action and cast a spell right away. Grinning like he'd cracked the code, he declared he didn't need candles anymore and flipped on glow magic. Tiny specks of light burst into the air and lit up the whole room, making everything instantly clear and unbelievably handy. Plopped on his bed, joystick clenched in both hands, Acheon stared and realized, man, he'd changed after choosing the adventure life, because his days weren't routine anymore, they were packed with non-stop adventures. Even with the crowd around him, it hit him. He knew plenty of faces in this city, but loneliness still gnawed at his chest, and a burning question surged in his heart. Would he ever find someone he could just sit down with and play games? The very next day, the young man stormed to the training grounds, and his heart nearly jumped when he spotted a huge crowd packed in, buzzing with energy. As he heard voices nearby, he couldn't help it and started eavesdropping. Eavesdropping on the talk, he clocked it fast. Everybody had stacked up to take the dungeon's 30th floor. They swore they had nothing to do there. Then Acheon realized what was really going on. Steel Feather and Fireblade, the legendary crews, were out recruiting. As soon as he spotted them, the adventurer's mind snapped back to the two groups he'd just seen in the tavern. And with his guild chat still fresh in his head, the protagonist instantly knew exactly what they'd been talking about. A quick thought flashed: if they were really recruiting, would they actually let him in? But doubt crashed in hard. Were they truly serious about storming something as deadly as that for? His eyes snagged on the notice, where the joining requirements were probably written out. And the moment he spotted the familiar trio of mages and that young boy, Akian's mind snapped into action. The mere thought of teaming up with those girls who'd already shut him down sparked a full-on inner revolt, so he slammed the decision into place. He would not go near where they were. Once his mind was made up, he kept marching straight back. He refused to train in front of everyone, so he slipped back to the hotel alone. And Akian immediately drilled in the details for tomorrow, reminding him that loners get the freedom to manage their own time as he dove straight into it. Next day rolled in, and the sky stayed crystal clear. Tiny clouds stretched out toward the horizon like a calm warning. Right at the dungeon's familiar entrance, Akian clenched his resolve and told himself, "It's time." As he stepped inside, he genuinely prayed the place would be quiet and give him zero adventures. After he checked that no one was lurking nearby, the adventurer snapped on his skill, ***, bloody transformation, ***, and boom. The vampire power let him shrug off the usual rule about heavy armor, because for him, that weight didn't even matter anymore. He smirked to himself because nobody would ever recognize him like this. Then, armor locking him up tight, he was ready to step straight into the dungeon. Bursting into the dark corridors, he snapped his hand up and cast a light spell right away. Suddenly, every step ahead felt easier. Akon clenched his resolve and pushed forward, using every fresh skill and spell he'd just learned, blasting his movement speed to new heights. The moment the first monsters lunged at him, he snapped off Strengthened Slash and slammed protection against physical attacks into place, then tore through them at lightning speed, because they couldn't land a single hit that mattered. Once the room was finally cleared, the adventurer snapped his index finger at the monsters. And right then, a thick black needle substance started oozing out of his fingertip. Akian dropped into a frantic crouch and jabbed the dead monster with his needle right at the last second. Before it vanished, he fired off a skill that steals skills and tried to steal their power for himself. The moment he nailed the skill, a system window blasted onto the screen, and he stared as his character's status flipped to the updated screen. Plus, he'd unlocked a brand new spell called ***light bullet ***. Feeling weirdly lucky, he pushed on. Relief hit him like a wave. He didn't want to tear open his enemies' bodies and drink their blood himself, and thank the stars, the blood armor worked exactly as it should. He refused to get stuck on just one skill and instead hunted for new moves on the very next monster. Sword in hand, he charged straight ahead, deeper and deeper into the dungeon, while Akon already had his prey in his sights. The deeper he pushed, the more his stomach sank. He'd already gone far, but there was still no sign of the next level, like the dungeon was messing with him, and the adventurer had no clue why. Then bam, an ear-splitting scream ripped through the air nearby, and the protagonist practically yelped, shocked out of nowhere because Akian absolutely didn't see it coming. He blurted in total confusion that he'd never heard anything like it, not even a clue where the sound was coming from, so the armored knight clamped down harder on his sword hilt, ready for a fight. And Akian started creeping toward the source step by step. A chilling dread slammed into him the moment he finally clocked that looming shadow, and all he could do was stammer out broken words. Pure shock, total disbelief, staring down a threat he couldn't even name. He clocked the moment as his chance to level up, snapped into fighting mode on instinct, and realized this wasn't just any foe. It was a totally unknown opponent he'd never faced before. Realizing the collision was unavoidable and that waiting would cost him the prize, he erupted into a sprint. All he cared about was hitting that spot fast. So in the dark dungeon, the only sound was his pounding, heavy steps. As he closed in, a young girl stood poised with a long sword in her hands straight in the shadowy nightstands. Across from her, something hovered like a nightmare, a ghost and a skeleton draped in a dark cloak. The devourer, the hero realized, and then he saw it, the scythe clenched in its hands. The girl's condition was dire, she could barely stay upright. She'd been slugging it out with that monster for ages, and the worst part, it wasn't just strong, it looked like death itself, like the final verdict. She couldn't process it, she was going to die in a place like this. The hero snapped back to everything he'd learned about the punishing devourer. How it only shows up when you blatantly break the dungeon's rules, like camping on the same floor for far too long. Around the corner, Akon finally peered out, and the monster hit him like a nightmare in living color, its horrific shape staring him down. The adventurer reeled back in terror, fixating on the scythe-wielding beast as it towered over the girl. When the devourer swings in for the killing blow, the protagonist snatches the girl and slams himself in front to block the impact, because just one strike nearly buckled his whole body, and even the knight in heavy armor can't believe the kind of power he's facing. After checking the damage, he spotted a huge dent carved in by that hit, and the heavily armored knight couldn't wrap his head around the sheer destruction. Then his eyes snapped to the girl he'd managed to catch. He stared in shock. There was the girl from Steel Pen, the one he'd spotted earlier in the tavern, and he couldn't wrap his head around it. How was she here alone when her group was supposed to be heading for the 30th floor? Trapped between a roaring monster and the girl clutched in his arms, the adventurer's mind went totally blank, panic screaming one silent question as he didn't know what to do next. He was completely stunned, his brain was racing with questions. How in the world did he slam the monster's attack to a stop when even she, a full-on elite fighter, couldn't even fight back? Because all he wanted was simple: dive into the dungeon, level up, and keep moving. Right as his thoughts raced, the devourer snapped in, and he blurted a muffled, involuntary cry that yanked the hero back into the moment. He spun around hard, and the knight and his armor finally realized fighting while he had a girl in his arms was a total nightmare. So he shifted his plan and started moving. He gently laid her on the cold stone floor, never once tearing his eyes from the devourer closing in. Then he shook himself hard, snapped his fear shut, and surged into action. No hesitation, no delay. He locked in and slammed to activate his Daywalker skill, praying it would tear down that terrifying monster. Then it worked, and his face twisted into a new form again. At that exact moment, confusion crashed over Akian. Why didn't he just switch off and trade places with the ghostly wanderer like always? Last time this power sparked, a whole new presence showed up and seized the body. The Scythe Devourer surged in, and the hero yanked himself together, bracing for impact. Then a brutal scream echoed through the dungeon again. It wasn't coming for him anymore. It snapped its target to the knight and charged straight at him. And in a flash, one terrifying thought gutted the hero. So it all came down to him: he'd have to crush this nightmare alone. While the thought hit hard, he yanked his sword free and braced to take the next strike. Akian planted his stance, hesitated for half a breath, then fear melted away as determination snapped into place. He swore, right then and there, he'd do everything in his power. He lunged forward and triggered Strike Strengthening, only for his weapon to slice right through the monster like it was smoke, and deal 0 damage. Suddenly it clicked in his head: this thing was a spirit, maybe even a ghost. Normal hits wouldn't touch it, so he had to switch tactics fast. No escape exists unless he taps magic, so the moment danger hits, he fires off a protective spell and shields himself from magical attacks. The moment hit him, he wrapped his blade in magic energy, focused hard, and his sword detonated into roaring flames. Then he swung and sliced straight through the trailing tail, splitting it clean in two, and the move worked. Pure confidence surged through him. Now this horror would tremble at his weapon like it was fire, and he barreled forward, smashing the attack without backing down. He bolted ahead, yelling that the monster had no escape. Then Akian suddenly clocked something. He snapped into action with flash step, then planted his feet, straightened up, and locked in his focus. He barely slipped out of the way as black smoke roared from the creature, that same lethal poison gas that melts flesh in seconds. Because the rescue wasn't luck. It was a miracle sparked the hero's instincts in real time. Determination surged back with brutal force. If that's how it had to be, he'd finish it with one single blow. He pulled every ounce of will and magical power into his hands and unleashed a whole barrage of spells at once, saving the deadliest one for last: light. The monster screamed in agony, and just like that, his focus shattered. Akian snapped into action on the spot, unleashing a storm of punches, each one landing dead on its mark. And that brutal combo let the hero power through the poisonous gas exactly as he'd planned. When he finally saw what he'd done, he burst into a joyful cry, then spun back fast, making sure that with his scythe in hand and his cape flaring, he'd wipe that monster out for good. When he spun around, there was nothing. No fallen stones, no body to be found, just a plain, empty stone floor staring back at him. The adventurer's hopes crumbled when he realized the enemy left behind nothing at all. No loot, no reward. And he snapped that he couldn't even take a sip of his blood because the guy was nothing but a ghost. Suddenly, it hit him. He remembered that unconscious girl from the steel pen. She was still breathing, but it was obvious she was hanging on by a thread. She had to be rushed to safety right away and get first aid fast. Cradling the wounded girl in his arms, the adventurer bolted for the dungeon exit, even though it wasn't easy to lug her around. Because if he kept her close, they could rocket out of the danger zone faster. As soon as he hit the surface, he hauled the rescued girl straight to the guild, right to the healer, so she could get the help she needed fast. Once he thanked the worker, he turned around and went back to the hotel. Freed from all that responsibility, the hero crumpled with exhaustion. He just flopped onto the bed and tried to reboot his mind. After about 3 days cooped up in his room, he finally bounced back, then stepped into the dining room and dug in, wishing himself a polite bon appetit. At breakfast, it hit him like a spark. Sure, eating alone felt nice, but having someone across the table would have made the whole moment way more fun. His thoughts got ripped apart when loud voices erupted at a nearby table. Someone swore Ilaria from the Steel Wing had almost died in the dungeon, and before anyone could breathe, one visitor demanded if she'd been rescued while another hit back with the only answer that mattered. She's alive. The first guy nodded and dropped the bombshell. Some dude had hauled her out of the dungeon on his back, and now they're hunting him hard. So Acheon instantly snapped to attention, ears up, because they were talking about him, and the second guy hit back, asking what anyone knew about that mystery rescuer. The visitor lit up and spilled that the hero was an armored adventurer who somehow had smashed that brutal devourer all by himself. And when the adventurer heard it, his suspicions snapped into place in his own mind. She was searching for him. And right there, the person across from him delivered it with full-on drama. This hero already had a nickname, Iron Bastion ***. The moment the main character heard that, indignation and sheer disbelief exploded out of him like, "Are you serious with a name that loud and that ridiculous?" The moment he heard his brand new nickname, food almost shot down the wrong pipe, and pure indignation hit him so hard he mentally screamed. Because no way was he accepting a name that ridiculous. Panic slammed into him. What if Ilaria had been awake the whole time and actually saw him? Then it hit him. Iron Bastion wasn't just a name. Those heavy armor plates were how he carried her straight from the dungeon to the guild infirmary. He forced himself to steady his breathing, thinking it through one sharp point at a time. She hadn't seen him try to tap the Daywalker's power, and that secret stayed locked inside him. Ilaria burst in out of nowhere, and in seconds she saw just how fast the rumors tore through the whole city. The whispers flying between them only poured gasoline on the rumors. Everyone's hunting the Iron Bastion now, and Ilaria is practically possessed by the idea of finding it, because nobody wants to miss meeting the person who took down that punishing devourer all by themselves. His worst fears snapped into place the moment he saw Ilaria grilling the inn patrons, watching them, begging for any sign of the Iron Bastion. And yup, she wasn't just asking around, she was really hunting it. Seeing the trap spring the moment she could spot him, Acheon bolted to safety before she even noticed his shadow. Then a familiar voice suddenly called his name. Relief washed over him as Ilaria drilled him, face to face, asking if he'd spotted an adventurer in heavy armor. Then the adventurer clocked her look and voice and realized she didn't recognize him at all, which totally played into his hands. He snapped back that he didn't know, then instantly looked away to dodge recognition, still managing to apologize, while the main character internally breathed a sigh of relief and bolted out of there. As he walked away, real relief hit him hard. Ilaria was safe and okay. He was thankful he'd managed to heal her even a little in that dungeon, but fear still gnawed at him like, is it really enough? But that nickname still wouldn't let him breathe. Rage sparked in his chest and he seethed at himself. Iron Bastion, that name is absolutely not for him. He took a hard look at the situation and realized something. He actually loved trading blows in heavy armor. But with eyes on him and the risk of being recognized, he decided to ditch it for now and slip into something else. Once he decided to act, he told himself everything would be fine as long as nobody recognized his face. So he went all in, built a brand new outfit, and refused to even imagine what this could unleash. Soon he couldn't wait to judge his own work, and the moment he saw it, pride lit him up. He felt completely safe, upgraded his armor from plain iron to tough steel, and bolted on a huge, intimidating shield that made the whole set look unstoppable. Then he stared at himself, new body, new armor, and a nasty truth hit him like a punch. This blazing, shining steel, this massive shield, he looked exactly like the Iron Bastion everyone had been hunting so hard. The young man surged up to the 17th floor, and the dungeon immediately turned nastier, tearing open the air with strange, beat-like sounds that sent a chill straight down his spine. As he pushed deeper and kept clearing the dungeon, he realized the enemies had completely leveled up. Way more kinds were crawling around than in the upper floors, where it used to be just one or two. Now there were tons of different monsters stacked against him. Cocooned in his fresh steel armor and towering shield, he just snorted with disdain, convinced these monsters were nothing but a minor threat. The moment new opponents popped into his mind, his excitement exploded, and he couldn't stop imagining the wild, one-of-a-kind skills he could steal from them, praying they'd become fresh weapons for his arsenal. With the skill steal ability, he snatched brand new powers tied to his axe, spear, and shield, and the moment they hit, he knew he'd just gained weapons-grade value. He stumbled onto a game-changing truth. If he stole the same skill from monsters of the same type, nothing advanced. But the moment he grabbed it from a brand new kind of monster, the skill's level shot up instantly. He realized something brutal. Up to the 20th floor, the monsters barely changed at all, and if he wanted to level up, he'd have to hunt down and smash through a whole mix of creatures. Buzzing with excitement over every new discovery, he didn't waste a second. He sprinted straight to the 20th floor boss, only to get worn down fast as the boss kept flooding the fight with one summoned ally after another. But he didn't lose his head. He remembered the old RPG tricks, zeroed in on where the danger was coming from, a Cheon, and with a clean, precise strike, he took it out. Even in all that chaos, the armored knight still wrestled control back and seized the advantage. He crouched and ripped skills from the wrecked body, and thank every training hour he hadn't forgotten the old tactics. First crush the summoner, then wipe out everyone else. After he crushed the boss, he snatched the general's great bow, a trophy worth more than gold, and it instantly supercharged his attack range. He couldn't stop admiring it, because with this beast in hand, his shooting skills were about to skyrocket. After that brutal fight and hours of trekking through the floors, his stomach started growling loud and clear, and the exhaustion hit hard. He needed a break because at this point he was starving. Climbing back up to the surface, he decided to finally earn that rest, and started daydreaming about lunch like it was a reward. Steaming soup, a sandwich stacked with bacon, lettuce, and tomatoes, and a dessert so good it felt guaranteed. Akyone dug into this delicious treat and boom, it turned out to be a daikapon, a juicy fruit that looked like an orange, and he yanked it up to arm's length just to drink in its gorgeous color and sweet, fragrant scent.